Welcome back. What you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're memories, echoing through the fog of war. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe and tell me where are you from and what time are you watching. Now, get comfortable. The rain is already falling, and the stories are on their way.
Sergeant Malcolm Hayes, 29 years old, Special Air Service, born in Edinburgh, Scotland. The snow falls in ghostly silence across the moonlit valley. Through my scope, I count 6 guards at the perimeter fence, hunched figures in greatcoats, breath steaming in the Baltic cold. I've been in this hide for 18 hours now, my body temperature slowly dropping despite the layers. My spotter, Cooper, hasn't moved in 3 hours. The perfect stillness that separates the professionals from the amateurs. Target confirmed. Cooper whispers, barely audible. Officer, entering the eastern building. The crosshairs settle on the collar of a Standartenführer. His medals catching moonlight. 812 meters. Wind from the west, 5 knots. Temperature -12. I make the adjustments mechanically. My mind clear as the winter air. Send it. Cooper breathes. I exhale halfway, hold, and squeeze. The suppressed Lee Enfield makes a muffled crack. Through the scope, I see the Nazi officer's head snap back before he crumples into the snow. For 3 long seconds, the guards continue their patrol. Unaware their commander lies, dead. Then the alarm begins. Time to move, I say, already breaking down the rifle. Behind us lies 40 kilometers of enemy territory. Ahead, the extraction point and safety, if we can survive the next 4 days. A mission that was supposed to be simple reconnaissance has become something else entirely, something far more dangerous. The drop had been perfect. 0200 hours, late January 1944, somewhere in the forests of occupied Poland. Cooper and I were tasked with gathering intelligence on a suspected rocket research facility. Simple observation and documentation, or, so command had said, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. We'd immediately buried our chutes and moved eastward through the silent forest. The moonlight painted everything in silver and black, turning the landscape into a surreal etching. The cold was biting, well below freezing, but perfect for our purpose. Frozen ground left few tracks. 4 days observation, then extraction. Cooper had reminded me as we crouched in the tree line. Just pictures and coordinates. Cooper was the newer of us, but still a veteran with 3 years in the regiment. Dark-haired, compact, with a mathematician's precision. I'd worked with worse spotters. He had the patience needed. The ability to lie motionless for hours that separates snipers from other soldiers. That first night, we covered 15 kilometers, staying well clear of roads and the small villages dotting the region. By dawn, we'd established our first observation post in a dense copse of pines overlooking the valley where our target supposedly lay. Through binoculars, I surveyed what command had identified simply as Site 27. The facility was smaller than intelligence had suggested. A cluster of low concrete buildings surrounded by 2 rows of fence. Guards patrolled at regular intervals, and trucks arrived every few hours. Nothing to suggest advanced weapons. Research. Looks more like a storage depot, Cooper murmured, making notes in his waterproof booklet. I nodded, scanning the perimeter. Too many guards for standard supplies, though. We spent that first day cataloging patrol patterns, guard, rotations, and vehicle movements. By nightfall, I'd counted 42 personnel, a mix of Wehrmacht and SS. 2 machine gun positions covered the main entrance, with a third overlooking the rear gate. We need to move closer, I decided, as darkness fell. There's a ridge, too. The north that should give us a better view of the interior. Cooper checked his compass. That puts us within 600 meters of the perimeter. It's necessary. We moved only after full darkness, crawling through snow-laden underbrush, freezing whenever the searchlight swept near our position. The bitter cold numbed fingers and toes, making even simple tasks challenging. By 0300, we'd reached the new position, a slight depression behind a fallen pine that offered both cover and a commanding view of the facility. Dawn revealed what we couldn't see in darkness. Rail lines extended from the largest building, partially concealed by camouflage netting. Workers were unloading crates from a cargo car, supervised by SS officers. "Those aren't supply shipments," Cooper said, tension in his voice. "Look at the handling." He was right. The crates were being moved with exceptional care, each one treated as if it contained explosives or delicate instruments. I focused my scope on the markings, a coded designation I didn't recognize. "We need to document everything," I said, already using the concealed camera to photograph the operation. "Command will want details on those markings." Day 2 passed with growing unease. The facility was clearly more significant than our briefing had indicated. By midday, I'd identified a senior SS officer, the Standartenführer, arriving in I, a staff car. His presence suggested the operation had high priority. "I don't like this," Cooper muttered as we watched the officer inspect the rail shipment. "Why would they send someone that senior to a remote depot?" We continued observation through the second night, taking turns sleeping in 30-minute shifts. The temperature dropped further, and frost formed on our eyebrows and beards. The Mai, cold, became a constant adversary, threatening to sap our concentration. Each breath had to be controlled to minimize the visible vapor. On the morning of the third day, everything changed. The tree line 2 kilometers south of our position erupted with activity. German troops, at least a company strength, emerged from trucks and began establishing a perimeter. "They're preparing for something," I said, studying the deployment through my scope. "Or they know we're here." Cooper shook his head. "If they knew our position, they'd have moved directly on us. This is something else." By midday, the reason became clear. 3 large canvas-covered trucks arrived, accompanied by motorcycle escorts. From beneath the covers, workers carefully extracted components of what appeared to be a missile, slender, with stabilizing fins and a distinctive nose cone. "That's it," Cooper whispered. "That's what command wants documented." I photographed everything, working the camera as the components were moved into the main building. The senior officer supervised the entire operation, occasionally consulting blueprints with a group of men in civilian clothes. Scientists, most likely. "We've seen enough," I decided as dusk approached. "We need to get this information back immediately." Cooper checked his map. "Extraction point is still 2 days away. We'll have to risk moving faster. This is too important." That decision changed everything. Rather than maintaining our cautious pace, we pushed harder through the frozen landscape, accepting greater risk for speed. By midnight, we'd covered 10 kilometers, skirting a village where troops were billeted. The sound of engines behind us suggested patrols had been increased. "They're searching," Cooper concluded as we paused, "to check our bearings. Not for us specifically, but security has been tightened." We continued through the night, stopping only when the sky began to lighten. Finding cover in a dense thicket, we took stock of our situation. The extraction point was still 30 kilometers away. Our next scheduled radio contact wasn't until 2200 hours. It was during that day's rest that we first heard the dogs, distant but unmistakable, the baying of German shepherds on a scent. Cooper's eyes met mine, both of us knowing what it meant. Our trail had been discovered, probably from where we'd observed the missile delivery. "They're still hours behind us," I said, checking my rifle. "We move at dusk, head directly for the extraction point." Cooper nodded grimly. "And if we can't make the rendezvous?" "Then we implement contingency protocols." We both knew what that meant. Destroy all documentation, split up, and attempt to reach the partisan networks to the east. A desperate option with low probability of success. When darkness fell, we moved again, pushing our pace despite the danger of leaving more obvious tracks. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant, suggesting we'd gained ground. By midnight, we'd reached the edge of a small industrial town, a potential crossing point for the river that lay between us and the extraction zone. Too risky to cross at the bridge, Cooper said, studying the German checkpoints through his binoculars. We'll have to find another way. That's when the complication arose. As we scouted the riverbank, a patrol emerged suddenly from a side street. 3 soldiers with a dog. There was no time to retreat. The first soldier died silently, my knife finding his throat before he could call out. Cooper took down the second, but the third managed to fire a single shot before I silenced him. The report echoed through the empty streets, and immediately, whistles and shouts responded. VT. River, now, I ordered, already sprinting toward the icy water. The shock of immersion nearly paralyzed me, the cold so intense it felt like fire. We swam with desperate strokes to the far bank, emerged dripping into the freezing air, and ran for the tree line beyond. Behind us, searchlights swept the area, and vehicles rumbled over the bridge. We can't stop, I gasped, though my uniform was already stiffening with ice. They'll have patrols on this side within minutes. For 3 hours, we pushed through forest and field, our wet clothes freezing to our skin. Hypothermia became a real threat, each step requiring greater effort. Finally, in the darkest hour before dawn, we found temporary shelter in an abandoned woodcutter's hut. Strip, I ordered Cooper, who was shivering uncontrollably. We need to get dry. Using our emergency kit, we managed to start a small, smokeless fire. It provided barely enough heat to dry our uniforms, but it kept us alive. Outside, the sounds of vehicles and search parties continued. Our narrow escape had clearly triggered a major response. They know they're hunting someone important now, Cooper said, his voice hoarse. The checkpoint guards would have reported. I nodded, checking our remaining supplies. We still have the documentation. That's what matters. By dawn, we'd recovered enough to continue, though exhaustion pulled at every muscle. The extraction point was now 15 kilometers away. But with search parties active throughout the region, the direct route was no longer viable. We would need to circle wide, adding hours to our journey. It was during this detour that we discovered the true nature of Site 27. From a WWII ridge overlooking a different valley, we spotted a test launch area, a concrete pad with technical equipment surrounding it. As we watched, technicians prepared what appeared to be a smaller version of the missile we documented earlier. They're testing the guidance system, Cooper realized, watching the activity through binoculars. That's what the facility is for, calibration and testing. The information was too valuable to ignore. Despite the danger, we established a hasty observation post and documented the test preparations. When the missile finally fired, its flight, path arcing high before descending precisely on a target area. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. London needs to see this, I said, securing the camera. It's a precision weapon. Cooper's expression was grim. With that accuracy, they could hit specific buildings in major cities. The delay cost us valuable time. Night had fallen again when we finally resumed our journey toward extraction. The rendezvous was scheduled for 0200 hours the following morning, less than 8 hours away, with 10 kilometers of enemy territory still to cross. Then we spotted him, the Standartenführer from the facility, traveling in a staff car toward what appeared to be a local headquarters. An opportunity to gather intelligence directly from the project's leadership. It's too risky, Cooper argued when I suggested following the officer. We have the photos. The extraction window is narrow. He wasn't wrong, but the potential intelligence value was too great. 2 hours, I compromised. We observe, then head directly to extraction. That decision led us to the moment described at the beginning. The fatal shot that eliminated a key figure in the German rocket program, and the alarm that followed. Now, as Cooper and I fled through the snowy forest, Pursuit was close behind. The extraction point was still 7 kilometers away, with less than 4 hours until the aircraft would arrive. "They're deploying in a standard search pattern," Cooper reported as we paused briefly to check behind us. "We can break contact if we cross the marshlands." I nodded, knowing it meant wading through partially frozen swamp in temperatures well below freezing. Another brush with hypothermia, but our only option. The marshland crossing nearly killed us both. Ice broke beneath our weight, plunging us repeatedly into frigid water. By the time we reached solid ground on the far side, Cooper could barely walk. I wasn't much better, my extremities numb and unresponsive. 3 kilometers, I encouraged him, checking my watch. 2 hours until extraction. We staggered forward, each step a battle against exhaustion and cold. The sounds of pursuit had faded, the Germans unwilling to follow us through the treacherous marsh, but our condition was deteriorating rapidly when we finally reached the extraction field, a flat, open area marked on our maps. Cooper collapsed. I checked his pulse, weak but present, and fired the recognition signal into the air. Then I waited, scanning the sky for the aircraft that represented our only hope of survival. The distinctive drone of the modified Halifax bomber became audible at 01:57 hours, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. It appeared low over the trees, making a single pass to confirm our identity before coming around for landing. The pilot showed exceptional skill, putting the aircraft down in the snowy field with minimal runway needed. With the last of my strength, I half-carried Cooper to the waiting plane, passing our precious documentation to the loadmaster before collapsing inside. As the aircraft accelerated for takeoff, German vehicles appeared at the forest edge, too late to prevent our escape. "Worth it?" the flight officer asked, nodding. To my near-frozen companion and my own frostbitten condition, I simply handed him the camera. "The Germans have precision-guided missiles. Everything's documented there." 3 days later, after medical treatment in London, I learned that our intelligence had been deemed critical to understanding the V-weapon threat. The facility we'd discovered was part of the guidance system development for what would later become the V-2 rocket. Cooper recovered from his hypothermia, though he lost 2 toes to frostbite. When asked if he would volunteer for another mission behind enemy lines, he didn't hesitate before answering affirmatively. Neither did I. The psychological strain of those days, the constant tension, the knowledge that discovery meant certain death, had changed us both. But it hadn't broken us. Some nights, I still dream of the snow and silence, of crosshairs on a distant figure, of the endless frozen landscape of enemy territory. The ghost of no man's land lives within me still, vigilant and watching, never fully at rest.
Lieutenant Robert Hargrove, 24 years old, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, born in Lexington, Kentucky. The aircraft rattled violently as flak exploded nearby, sending shrapnel pinging against the metal fuselage. Red light bathed the interior, casting eerie shadows across the faces of 20 men who knew most would not survive the night. My static line was hooked, equipment checked for the dozenth time. The jumpmaster screamed something inaudible over the roar of engines and anti-aircraft fire. Somewhere below us, hidden in darkness, the Norman countryside waited. So did the Germans. A massive explosion rocked the aircraft, tilting it sharply to port. Someone tumbled against me, and I braced against the fuselage. Through the small window, I glimpsed another C-47 erupting into flames, silhouettes of paratroopers framed against the inferno as they desperately tried to exit the burning plane. "Stand up!" The jumpmaster's voice finally penetrated the chaos. We rose as one, hooked up, and shuffled toward the door. Green light. I was third in line. The man in front of me disappeared into the howling void. Then it was my turn. I hurled myself into the night, felt the violent jerk as my parachute deployed, and then silence. A moment of eerie calm amid hell as I floated downward. The calm shattered as tracers arced toward me from below. We'd been training for this moment for over 2 years. The 506th had been my life since I'd volunteered in 1942, leaving behind a promising position at my father's law firm in Kentucky. I'd never regretted it. Not during the grueling marches at Tocoa, not during jump school, not even during the miserable winter exercises in England. The men around me had become more than friends. They were brothers in all but blood. Captain, Lewis had assembled our stick the night before the jump. The intelligence briefing was sobering. Drop zones here. He'd pointed to the map. We'll be landing near Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. Primary objective is to secure these causeways leading. From Utah Beach, his finger traced the narrow roads cutting through marshland. Wehrmacht 352nd Infantry Division is in the area, possibly elements of the 6th Parachute Regiment. They know we're coming. They just don't know when or where. He'd looked around the room, making eye contact with each of us. Once we're on the ground, rally at the designated points. If you can't find your unit, join up with any Americans you encounter and accomplish the mission. Clear the causeways, secure the exits from the beach. Sleep had been impossible that night. Most of us wrote letters home instead, the kind that would only be delivered if we didn't return. I wrote to my parents and to Catherine, my fiancée. Simple letters, devoid of the fear clawing at my insides. I sealed them and handed them to the chaplain without rereading them. The morning of June 5th passed in a blur of equipment checks and last-minute briefings. By afternoon, the enormity of what we were about to attempt settled over the base, like a fog. Thousands of paratroopers preparing to jump into hostile territories were at night, miles from the nearest friendly forces. Scared, Bob? Sergeant Frank Miller asked as we painted our faces with invasion stripes, black and white to identify us as American in the confusion to come. Terrified, I admitted. No point in lying to Miller. We'd been through too much together. He nodded, continuing to blacken his face. Good. Means you're sane. He finished and wiped his hands on his trousers. Just remember, the fear gets you through the door. After that, training takes over. We boarded the aircraft at 22:30 hours. 20 of us packed into the C-47, laden with equipment. Lieutenant Parker sat opposite me, fingering the St. Christopher medal around his neck. Private Jenkins was reciting something under his breath, prayer or poem. I couldn't tell. Corporal Ramirez checked his switchblade for the 100th time, the one he called his insurance policy. The engines roared to life and we began taxiing toward the runway. No turning back now. Operation Neptune, the airborne component of Overlord, had begun. The channel crossing was smooth, almost peaceful. Some men dozed, others stared into space, lost in private thoughts. I reviewed the maps in my head, committing key terrain features to memory. Everything changed as we approached the French coast. Anti-aircraft fire blossomed below us, reaching up with lethal fingers. Our formation began to fragment as pilots took evasive action. The relatively orderly plan was disintegrating before we'd even reached the drop zone. Then I was falling through darkness, tracers streaking past me like deadly fireflies. The ground rushed up faster than expected. We were lower than planned. I crashed through tree branches before hitting the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact as I'd been trained. My ankle twisted painfully, but adrenaline muted the sensation. I quickly disentangled myself from my parachute and found cover beneath a hedgerow. The cricket signaling device we'd been issued clicked in my hand. 1 click, followed by 2 in response if you found a friendly. I waited, listening to distant gunfire and the sound of more aircraft overhead. Nothing nearby, consulting my compass. I oriented myself and began moving cautiously toward what I hoped was the rally point. The night was disorienting. The familiar landscape of the sand tables and maps now a dark maze of hedgerows and drainage ditches. After 20 minutes of careful movement, I heard rustling ahead. I flattened against the earth, cricket in hand. 1 click. Silence. I tried again. Nothing. Flash, I whispered, using our backup challenge. Thunder, came the reply, and I nearly sagged with relief. 3 figures materialized from the darkness. Corporal Ramirez from my stick, and 2 others I didn't recognize from I Company. Lieutenant Hargrove, I introduced myself quietly. 506th Fox Company. Sergeant Wilson, I Company. The taller of the unknown men replied, "This is Private Lewis. Wow, where's the rest of your stick?" I shook my head. "Scattered. You're the first I've found." "We're way off target," Wilson said. "I think we're about 4 miles northeast of our DZ." Perfect. The precise disarray the Germans would exploit if they realized how scattered we were. "Any of you know where the nearest causeway is?" I asked. Ramirez nodded. "I think it's about 2 miles west of here, sir. I spotted it while coming down." "Then that's our objective. We move in that direction, collect any stragglers we find, and secure that causeway. The 4th Infantry will be landing." I checked my watch. Less than 6 hours. They'll need those exits clear. We set off, moving parallel to hedgerows when possible, using them for cover. The countryside wasn't silent. Sporadic gunfire echoed across the fields, and occasionally flares would illuminate the sky, forcing us to freeze until darkness returned. An hour later, our small group had grown to 7 men. Still no sign of Captain Lewis or Lieutenant Parker, but we'd found Private Jenkins, who'd landed in a flooded field and nearly drowned, before cutting himself free from his parachute. The others were from different companies, even different regiments, a testament to how scattered the drops had been. "Patrol ahead," whispered Lewis, who was on point. We immediately went to ground. Through the gloom, I could make out 5 or 6 figures moving along the road we'd been paralleling. German, helmets silhouetted against the night sky. They were heading in the same direction we were, toward the causeway. I motioned for the others to gather around. "We need to take them out silently," I whispered. "If they reach the causeway before us, they'll reinforce whatever defenses are already there." "I count 6, Ramirez said. "Even odds. Knives and garrots," Wilson suggested. "Save ammunition and avoid alerting other patrols." The grim calculus of combat. 7 of us against 6 of them. In the dark, fighting with blades rather than bullets. I nodded my agreement. We split into pairs, with me going solo, and paralleled the German patrol from the concealment of the hedgerow. They were talking quietly among themselves, relaxed, unaware of our presence. When they reached a bend in the road bordered by dense vegetation, I gave the signal. We struck simultaneously, erupting from the darkness. I tackled the rearmost German, clamping one hand over his mouth while driving my combat knife into his kidney. He struggled briefly, then went limp. Around me, similar grim work was being done. One German managed a strangled cry before Sergeant Wilson silenced him. Then it was over. 6 bodies on the moonlit road. "Check for maps and documents," I ordered, keeping my voice steady despite the nausea rising in my throat. This was different from the sanitized killing of firing a rifle from a distance. "And grab their weapons. We could use the extras." Private Jenkins was trembling, staring at blood on his hands. His first kill. I realized. "You did what was necessary," I told him quietly. "Remember why we're here." He nodded jerkily and began searching the dead man at his feet. We appropriated 2 MP-40 submachine, guns, ammunition, and a map that showed German defensive positions, a valuable find. Then we dragged the bodies into the underbrush. They'd be discovered eventually, but hopefully not before morning. By 0300 hours, we could hear heavy fighting to the south, other elements of the 101st engaging the enemy. We pressed on toward our objective, the small force now moving with the confidence that comes from shared bloodshed. Even Jenkins had steadied, the initial shock of close quarters killing replaced by grim determination. We reached the vicinity of the causeway shortly before 0400. As expected, it was defended. a machine gun position covering the road, with what appeared to be a squad of infantry dug in nearby. From our concealed position in a drainage ditch, I studied the layout through my binoculars. MG-42, I murmured. Probably 10 to 12 infantry supporting it. More than we could handle in a frontal assault. We could bypass them, suggested Wilson. Find another route to the beach. I shook my head. Orders were clear. Secure the causeways. If that gun is still there when our boys hit the beach, it'll be a massacre. Split up? Ramirez offered. Flank them from both sides? It was our best option. I divided our small force, taking Jenkins, Lewis, and a quiet bar gunner named Doyle with me to circle around to the east. Wilson would lead Ramirez and the others to approach from the west. We synchronized watches, attack at 0430 precisely. As we maneuvered into position, I found myself missing the rest of my stick, wondering how many had survived the jump. Captain Lewis had been like a father to the company during training. Lieutenant Parker had been my roommate for months. Were they alive? Dead? Leading their own impromptu units toward their objectives? We reached our position with 10 minutes to spare. The German machine gun crew was alert, scanning the approaches to their position, but they were focused on the causeway itself, not the flanks. Their supporting infantry were less vigilant. A few appeared to be dozing in, their foxholes. Doyle, target the machine gun with the bar, I whispered. Jenkins, Lewis, pick your targets among the infantry. I'll take the right flank, on my signal. The minutes crawled by. My mouth was dry, heart hammering against my ribs. Not fear now, but the tension of the hunter awaiting the perfect moment. I checked my watch. 0429. 30 seconds. I removed the pin from a grenade, waiting for the second hand to reach 12. Then I hurled it toward the right flank of the German position and shouted, "Now!" The pores. Grenade exploded, sending 2 Germans flying from their foxholes simultaneously. Doyle opened up with the bar, the heavy rounds chewing into the machine gun position. The Germans reacted with professional speed, returning fire into the darkness where our muzzle flashes revealed our position. From the opposite side, Wilson's group opened fire, catching the Germans in a deadly crossfire. For 30 seconds, the night was torn apart by gunfire, explosions, and shouting. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I signaled a ceasefire and waited, listening for any signs of movement from the German position. Nothing. Advance with caution, I ordered. We moved forward. Weapons ready. The machine gun position had been obliterated by Doyle's accurate fire. The supporting infantry had fared no better, caught between our 2 groups. Several had died in their foxholes, never fully awakening from their pre-dawn. Doe's 1 German was still alive, badly wounded. Private Lewis, who spoke some German, knelt beside him. He says there's another defensive position a quarter mile down the causeway, Lewis reported. Larger force, with mortars. I nodded grimly. Our small victory had only secured the entrance to the causeway. The hard work was still ahead. We treated the wounded German as best we could, though his injuries were likely fatal. Sergeant Wilson organized the collection of ammunition and weapons while I studied the detailed map we'd captured earlier. If we follow this drainage ditch, I said, tracing the line with my finger, we can approach the next position from high ground to the north. As I spoke, the distant rumble of naval gunfire reached us. The bombardment of the beaches had begun. Somewhere out in the darkness, thousands of men were preparing to storm the Norman coastline. Our job was to ensure they had a clear path inland once they did. Rest for 5 minutes, I told the men. Check your weapons and ammunition. We move out at 0500. As the others slumped against the embankment, I found myself standing beside Ramirez, who was lighting a cigarette, cupping it carefully to hide the glow. Think we'll make it through the day, Lieutenant? He asked quietly. I looked at our ragtag group, 7 men from different units, thrown together by fate and the disorganization of the largest airborne operation in history. In the pre-dawn gloom, their faces were masks of exhaustion and determination. Some of us will, I answered truthfully. Maybe all. The important thing is the mission. Ramirez nodded, taking a long drag from his cigarette. My old man was at Belleau Wood in the last war. Said once you accept you're already dead, the fighting gets easier. I thought about that as the eastern sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly. Perhaps he was right. We'd all written those final letters, said our mental goodbyes before boarding the aircraft. Everything since the green light had been borrowed time. Let's move, I said, checking my Thompson submachine gun. Still have a war to win. As we gathered our gear and prepared to advance toward the next objective, I felt an odd sense of clarity. The crushing psychological tension of the past day, the anticipation, the drop, the disorientation, the killing, had crystallized into something hard and purposeful. Looking at the faces around me, I could see the same transformation. No longer were we individuals weighed down by fear and doubt. We had become something else, a weapon, forged in darkness and chaos, now cutting its way toward the dawn of June 6th, 1944. Behind us lay the broken bodies of those who had tried to stop us. Ahead lay more fighting, more death. And beyond that, if we survived, a lifetime of trying to explain to those who weren't here what this night had cost and changed. Dawn broke over Normandy as we moved out. 7 paratroopers advancing toward their objective, already miles from where they should have been, yet exactly where they needed to be.
Lieutenant William Bill Sterling, 27 years old, 1st Special Air Service Regiment, born in Edinburgh, Scotland. The sand felt like needles against my face as I pressed myself flat against the desert floor. 20 meters ahead, the German sentry paced back and forth, the cherry glow of his cigarette marking his position in the darkness. My body ached after 3 days of marching through the Libyan desert, carrying enough explosives to demolish half the Luftwaffe's North African air fleet. Sweat trickled down my spine despite the night chill. I could hear Sergeant Davies breathing beside me, feel the tension radiating from his coiled body. "Now," I whispered. Davies moved like a shadow, flowing across the sand with a silence that seemed impossible for a man his size. I followed, 3 paces behind, Fairbairn Sykes' fighting knife gripped in my right hand. The sentry turned, sensing something, but too late. Davies was on him from behind, one hand clamped over his mouth, the other driving his knife up under the ribcage. A single muffled grunt, then nothing. We dragged the body behind a fuel drum as the rest of our 8-man section materialized from the darkness. No words were exchanged, just hand signals. The airfield lay before us. 18 Messerschmitt Bf-109s and 12 Junkers, U-87 Stukas lined up in neat rows, ripe for destruction. This was why the SAS existed. Deep penetration, maximum damage, vanish like ghosts. I nodded to Corporal Lewis, who began distributing the time pencil fuses and plastic explosives from his pack. We had 30 minutes to wire all 30 aircraft and the fuel depot before slipping away into the desert night. 30 minutes until the entire German airfield would become an inferno of exploding aviation fuel and ammunition. 30 minutes until we became the hunted. Northern Libya was hell on earth in August 1942. The SAS had been operating behind enemy lines for weeks, striking at Axis Airfields, supply depots, and communication centers as part of the preparations for Montgomery's offensive at El Alamein. Our particular mission was to destroy the aircraft at a forward Luftwaffe airfield near Benghazi, reducing German air support capabilities for Rommel's Africa Corps. Major David Sterling, my older brother and the founder of the SAS, had briefed us personally. "Gentlemen, intelligence reports 30 aircraft at Airfield Delta, predominantly fighters and dive bombers. Your job is simple. Get in, destroy everything that can fly, and get out. Your extraction point is 60 miles southwest at these coordinates. You've got 4 days to complete the operation and reach the pickup point." David had pointed at the map, his finger landing on an unmarked stretch of desert. The long-range desert group will be waiting for you here, but only for a 12-hour window. Miss it, and you're walking back to our lines, roughly 250 miles. We'd been inserted by the LRDG, the Long-Range Desert Group, 100 miles from the target. The LRDG were our desert taxi service, experts at navigating the vast emptiness of the North African wasteland in their modified Chevrolet trucks. They dropped us off at 0200 on August 15th with a final word of caution. German patrols have been thick lately. Watch yourselves. For 3 days we'd moved only at night, covering ourselves with sand during daylight hours to avoid detection by German reconnaissance aircraft. 8 men carrying enough explosives to level a small village, navigating by the stars, conserving water, and staying in the shadows. This was SAS work, grueling, precise, invisible. My section consisted of men I'd trust with my life, because I did, daily. Sergeant Thomas Davies, a Welsh coal miner before the war, built like a bull but silent as a cat. Corporal Alec Lewis, our explosives expert, who could wire a bomb with his eyes closed. Lance Corporal James Harris, former London cab driver who never got lost, not even in featureless desert. And 4 privates, Miller, Spencer, Thompson, and O'Brien, all veterans of our raids on Axis Airfields over the previous months. We reached the outskirts of the airfield at 01:15 on August 18th. The intelligence was accurate. From our observation point, I counted 18 Bf-109s and 12 Stukas, along with a fuel depot on the eastern edge of the field. Security seemed light, just perimeter patrols and a few guards near. The aircraft. The Germans obviously felt safe this far behind their lines. After observing for an hour, I gathered the men for final instructions. Davies, Harris, you take the fuel depot. 4 charges should do it. Lewis, you're with me on the fighters. Miller. And Spencer, take the eastern row of Stukas. Thompson and O'Brien, the western row. Time pencils set for 45 minutes. That gives us 15 minutes to clear the perimeter before the fireworks start. Rendezvous point is the rock formation, 2 miles southwest. Questions? There were none. These men knew their business. Remember, I added, silence is survival. 1 alarm and we've got the entire Africa Corps on our backs. We moved in at 0230, using the darkness just before moonrise. The first sentry fell to Davies' knife. The second never even knew we were there. O'Brien took him from behind with a garrote. We entered the airfield proper without raising an alarm. The Messerschmitts stood in a perfect line, silvery in the starlight. Beautiful, deadly machines. I felt a momentary pang. In another situation, I might have admired their engineering. Instead, I began placing charges under the first aircraft's fuel tank, while Lewis moved to the next. The process was methodical. 2 pounds of plastic explosive under the fuel tank. Time pencil fuse inserted. Move to the next target. Every few seconds, I'd freeze, listening for patrols. The tension was unbearable. Each aircraft took approximately 90 seconds to wire, and with every passing minute, the chance of discovery increased. I was on my 9th aircraft when I heard it, the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle bolt being drawn back. I froze, explosive in hand, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would give me away. Where ist da? A German voice, no more than 15 feet behind me. I remained motionless, barely breathing. The German guard moved closer, his boots crunching softly on the hard-packed sand. In the darkness beneath the Messerschmitt, I could see his legs. Approaching, a sudden burst of machine gun fire erupted from across the airfield. Short, controlled, then silence. The guard's attention snapped toward the sound. It was the distraction I needed. I lunged from beneath the aircraft, driving my fighting knife up into the base of his skull before he could shout. He collapsed without a sound. I pulled his body under the aircraft and continued working, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Something had gone wrong elsewhere on the field. The machine gun fire meant one of my teams had been compromised. I finished wiring the last fighter and moved toward the prearranged rendezvous point near the edge of the airfield. Lewis appeared, beside me, nodding to indicate his section was complete. Then Miller and Spencer, both looking grim. "Thompson and O'Brien," I whispered. Miller shook his head. Guard patrol spotted them. O'Brien took down 2 with his Sten before they got him. Thompson's covering our withdrawal. I nodded, feeling the familiar hollowness that comes with losing. Men. "Davies and Harris?" Already at the rendezvous point. "Fuel depot wired. Move out. I'll wait 2 minutes for Thompson." They disappeared into the darkness while I counted seconds in my head. At 115, a figure came sprinting across the tarmac. Thompson, running flat out. Behind him, shouts and the beam of a searchlight cutting through the night. "Alarms triggered!" he gasped as he reached me. "They're mobilizing!" We ran, keeping low, using the aircraft for cover until we reached the perimeter wire. The searchlight beam swept back and forth, looking for us. Behind us, the German guards were fully alert now, shouting orders and organizing search parties. We slipped through a gap in the wire that Davies had cut earlier and sprinted for the rocky outcropping where the others waited. The desert night swallowed us as we put distance between ourselves and the airfield. 5 minutes of hard running brought us to the rendezvous point. "O'Brien?" Davies asked as we arrived. I shook my head. His face hardened, but he said nothing. We'd all lost friends before. There would be time to mourn later. "How long on the fuses?" Harris asked. I checked my watch. 17 minutes. We need to move. We jogged southwest, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the target. The desert floor was firm here, allowing for good speed without leaving obvious tracks. After 15 minutes, we stopped and turned back toward the airfield, now visible only as a collection of dim lights on the horizon. The first explosion came right on schedule, a bright flash followed by a deep thump that we felt through the soles of our boots. Then another, and another, until the entire airfield seemed to erupt in flames. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition cooked off in the burning aircraft. "That'll wake the neighborhood," Lewis muttered. It was a spectacular sight. 30 million pounds worth of German aircraft and fuel transforming into a massive funeral pyre that lit up the desert for miles. The mission was a success, but there was no time for celebration. Every German unit within 50 miles would be on high alert now. "Move out," I ordered. "We've got 50 miles to cover before dawn." The night march that followed was one of the most mentally exhausting experiences of my military career. Every shadow seemed to be a German patrol, every distant engine noise a search party. We moved in complete silence, conserving water and energy, maintaining a steady pace that ate up the miles. Dawn found us concealed in a shallow wadi, covered with our sand sheets to avoid detection from the air. The day's heat was brutal, the temperature soaring to over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. We rationed water carefully, taking only enough to prevent heat stroke. None of us spoke. Speaking required energy, and energy was precious. Closed my eyes but didn't sleep. The image of O'Brien falling played on repeat in my mind. Another name to add to the growing list of men lost under my command. Another letter to write when we returned to base. If we returned to base. As twilight approached, aircraft appeared overhead. Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes searching for the saboteurs who had destroyed their airfield. They made methodical passes over the desert, looking for any sign of human presence. We remained motionless under our covers, becoming part of the landscape. After sunset, we continued our journey southwest toward the extraction point. The constant psychological pressure was as exhausting as the physical demands. We were deep in enemy territory with no support, no heavy weapons, and limited ammunition. If discovered, we would be vastly outnumbered and outgunned. On the second, night after the raid, disaster struck. We were moving through a narrow pass between two ridgelines when the unmistakable sound of vehicle engines echoed from ahead. I raised my fist and the section froze instantly. Patrol, Davies whispered. "Coming this way." There was no cover in the pass, just bare rock and sand. Nowhere to hide 7 men. Fighting was suicide. The sound would attract every German. "Unit in the area. We were trapped. Scatter," I ordered. "Meet at the extraction point. If anyone's captured, remember your cover story. South African reconnaissance unit separated from your patrol." The men melted away into the darkness, each taking a different route. I scrambled up the eastern ridge, finding a crevice between 2 boulders just as the vehicle headlights appeared at the mouth of the pass. 3 German half-tracks loaded with infantry moved slowly through, their spotlights sweeping the terrain. I pressed myself deeper into the crevice, controlling my breathing, willing myself to become stone. A spotlight passed over my position, lingered for a heartbeat, then moved on. The patrol continued through the pass and disappeared to the north. I remained hidden for 20 minutes before moving again, working my way carefully down the ridge and continuing southwest. The psychological strain was immense. Alone now, surrounded by enemy territory, uncertain of my teammates' fates. By dawn of the 3rd day, I'd covered another 20 miles, reaching a series of low hills that matched the terrain features near our extraction point. I concealed myself again for the daylight hours, conserving strength and scanning the horizon for signs of my men or enemy patrols. That evening, as I prepared to move out for the final leg to the extraction point, a figure materialized from the gathering darkness. I had my Webley revolver halfway, drawn before recognizing Davies' distinctive outline. "The others?" I asked as he approached. "Lewis and Thompson are ahead at the extraction point. Miller caught a bullet during the night. German motorcycle patrol spotted him. Spencer's helping him along. No sign of Harris." I nodded grimly. "Let's move." Extraction window opens at 0200. We reach the designated coordinates at 0100, finding Lewis and Thompson already there, hidden among a cluster of rocks. An hour later, Spencer appeared with Miller, the latter's leg crudely bandaged and his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "Kraut patrol," Spencer explained. "Single shot through the calf, clean exit wound. I checked Miller's injury, painful but not life-threatening if we got him to medical attention soon." Harris never appeared, another name for the list, at precisely 0205. The low rumble of engines came from the south. We tensed, weapons ready, until the correct recognition signal, 3 quick flashes followed by 2 long ones, came from the approaching vehicles. The long-range desert.
Group right on schedule. The LRDG patrol, 3 heavily armed Chevrolet trucks, pulled up to our position.
Their commander, Captain Mitchell, greeted me with a quick handshake. "Successful?" he asked. 30 aircraft and a fuel depot. 2 men down." He nodded soberly. "Worth it. Rommel's air cover is crippled in this sector. Montgomery sends his compliments. We..." Loaded into the vehicles, Miller's wound receiving proper attention from the LRDG medic. As we drove south toward Allied lines, I stared back at the vast emptiness of the desert, somewhere in which O'Brien and Harris remained, part of the landscape now, part of the war. The SAS had started the war with a motto that summed up our approach: "Who dares wins." But as the trucks bounced across the desert, putting miles between us and the enemy, I found myself thinking of a different phrase, one that captured the psychological reality of special operations behind enemy lines, the ghost that kills. We appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished. But the cost of playing ghost was paid in men who never returned to haunt the enemy again. It was a price we would continue to pay until the Desert War was won.
Sergeant Michael Donovan, 24 years old, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Born in Springfield, Massachusetts. The C-47 bucked violently as flak exploded just off our wing. The red light above the door bathed us in an eerie glow, turning the tense faces of my stick into something from a nightmare. I could feel the weight of the equipment strapped to my body, Nearly 100 pounds of gear that would either save my life or drag me to the bottom of a flooded Norman field. The jumpmaster shouted something, but his words were lost in the roar of the engines and the hammering of anti-aircraft fire. Another explosion. Closer this time. The plane lurched and Kowalski, standing across from me, stumbled and would have fallen if Martinez hadn't grabbed his harness. Through the small window I could see the dark landscape below, occasionally illuminated by searchlights and the hellish orange bloom of exploding shells. Somewhere down there was our drop zone, or what was supposed to be our drop zone. The green light flashed on. Go! 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 The jumpmaster screamed. I was third in line. Reynolds went first, disappearing into the black void without hesitation. Then Fisher. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the door, my hands gripping the sides of the fuselage. Wind howled past, trying to tear me from the aircraft before I was ready. Below, through swirling clouds, I could see tracer fire crisscrossing, the darkness like deadly Christmas lights. Move it, Donovan, someone shouted behind me. I jumped. The blast of air hit me like a truck, the prop wash tumbling me violently before my parachute deployed with a jolt that nearly tore my shoulders from their sockets. As I swung beneath the canopy, the relative silence after the roaring plane was almost as disorienting as the darkness. I could hear the crackle of distant gunfire, the drone of more aircraft overhead, and the muffled thuds of artillery. I had no idea where I was. None of us did. But somewhere below, in the darkness of occupied France, my brothers in arms were falling from the sky. If I survived the landing, my job was to find them. They'd briefed us extensively before we left England, but nothing could have prepared us for the reality of dropping into Normandy on D-Day. Our regiment, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne, had trained for nearly 2 years for this moment. We jumped from mock-ups, from training towers, from planes flying in perfect formation over the peaceful English countryside. We'd studied sand tables and maps until we could navigate the Norman landscape in our sleep. But that night, June 5th, 1944, though it was already past midnight and technically D-Day, all that training collided with the chaos of actual combat. We took off from Upottery Airfield in England at 22:30 hours. Our C-47, nicknamed Lady Luck, was part of a massive aerial armada. Through the windows I could see aircraft stretching to the horizon, their navigation lights creating rivers of red and green flowing through the night sky. Inside our plane, the mood was a strange mix of excitement, fear, and determination. "Hey, Donovan," Fisher said, leaning toward me over the roar of the engines. "When we get to Paris, first round's on you, right?" "Sure thing," I replied, playing along with the tradition we'd started during training. "And when we get to Berlin, we're drinking Hitler's wine cellar dry." The ritual helped calm the nerves. We all knew the statistics. Airborne operations were risky even without enemy fire. Add in the German defenses and our odds weren't great. But the 101st didn't dwell on odds. We made our own luck. Captain Winters moved through the aircraft, checking equipment and offering quiet words of encouragement. Unlike some officers, Winters never had to raise his voice to command respect. When he spoke, men listened. "Remember your training," he said, his voice steady. "Find the assembly areas. If you're alone, join the nearest unit and fight. The mission comes first." Our mission was to secure exits from Utah Beach, capture key bridges, and disrupt German communications and reinforcements. Simple on paper, but we all knew better. The flight was supposed to take about an hour and a half. For the first hour, things went as planned. Men dozed, prayed, or stared silently into space. Some played cards or double-checked their equipment for the 100th time. Martinez was reciting something in Spanish, a prayer, or maybe a poem from home. Reynolds was methodically checking the activation wire on his reserve chute, his face impassive. Then we hit the cloud bank over the channel, and the formation began to scatter. Our pilots, trying to stay together and avoid collisions, deviated from the planned route. By the time we reached the Normandy coast, Lady Luck was flying alone through a gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire. The jump itself was a blur, 4 seconds of free fall, then the opening shock as my parachute deployed. I immediately began checking for damage to my canopy while trying to get oriented. Below me, machine gun tracers crisscrossed the darkness like deadly searchlights, hunting for targets. The ground came up faster than expected. I hit hard in what felt like a plowed field, collapsing into a PLF, parachute landing fall. As we'd been trained, pain shot through my ankle, but nothing felt broken. I quickly gathered my chute, unhooked my harness, and retrieved my M1 from its leg bag. For a moment, I just lay there in the darkness, listening. Scattered gunfire erupted from several directions. In the distance, I could hear the rumble of vehicles, German mechanized units responding to the invasion. Above, more C-47s droned overhead, disgorging more paratroopers into the night. I had no idea where I was. None of my stick had landed nearby, or if they had, I couldn't see them in the darkness. According to the plan, I should have been near the village of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, but the scattered drop meant I could be miles from my intended landing zone. Using the cricket signaling device we'd been issued, I clicked twice, then waited. 2 clicks, pause, 2 clicks. The recognition signal that should bring any nearby paratroopers to me. After several attempts with no response, I realized I was on my own. I checked my compass and began moving cautiously toward what I hoped was the assembly area. The night was alive with sound, distant firefights, the occasional explosion, and the constant drone of aircraft overhead. I moved from hedgerow to hedgerow, using the thick Norman foliage for cover. After about 20 minutes of careful movement, I heard the challenge. Flash! I froze, then whispered the countersign. Thunder! A figure emerged from the shadows, the white spearhead patch of the 101st Airborne visible on his shoulder. It was First Lieutenant Harris from Dog Company. Sergeant Donovan, 506th, I said quietly. Harris nodded. You're the first from your stick I've seen. We've got 8 men gathered about 100 yards back. Follow me. I fell in behind him, relief washing over me. I wasn't alone anymore. The small group Harris had gathered was a hodgepodge from different companies, even different regiments. 2 men from the 501st, 3 from my own 506th, and a couple from the 82nd, airborne who'd been dropped wildly off course. None were from my stick. Anyone seen Captain Winters? I asked. A private named Johnson shook his head. Haven't seen any officers except Lieutenant Harris here. We're pretty scattered. Harris unfolded a map, shielding a small red-filtered flashlight with his hand. Based on that church steeple and the road configuration, I think we're here, he said, pointing to a spot several kilometers from our intended drop zone. The nearest objective is this crossroads. We're heading there to link up with any other units in the area. That was how D-Day began for us. Small groups of paratroopers, many lost and separated from their units, gathering together and moving toward objectives that might not be where they were supposed to be on the map. The chaos of the drop had scattered the division across the Ioia, Normandy countryside like buckshot. As dawn approached, our small band had grown to 15 men. We'd encountered a German patrol at 0330 hours, engaging in a brief but intense firefight that left 2 Germans dead and one of our men wounded. Private Miller, a bar gunner from the 501st, had taken a bullet through the shoulder. We patched him up as best we could, but he needed proper medical attention. Can you walk? Harris asked him. Miller nodded grimly, his face pale but determined. Yes, sir. Just point me in the direction you want me to shoot. That was the spirit of the airborne. You kept moving, kept fighting, no matter what. By 0600 hours, we'd reached the outskirts of a small village that, according to Harris's map, should be Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. As we approached cautiously, we heard the distinctive sound of an M1 Garand firing from somewhere in the village center. Americans in the town, Harris said. Let's move up, but careful. Could be Germans using captured weapons. We used the cricket signals as we approached. Click, click, pause, click, click. The response came immediately. Click, click, click. Americans, but not necessarily 101st. The 82nd used a different signal. Moving from building to building, we entered the village. In the town square, we found a reinforced platoon from Easy Company, 506th, led by Lieutenant Spares. And there, directing the defense of the northern approach, was Captain Winters. The relief I felt seeing familiar faces was indescribable. Winters acknowledged us with a nod, then immediately integrated our group into the defense. "Sergeant Donovan, take your men and secure that building," he ordered, pointing to a stone structure overlooking the main road. "We've got reports of German armor moving this way from Carentan. Within our ranks, no lengthy reunion was necessary. A nod, a pat on the shoulder, a quick, 'Glad you made it.' That was all we needed. We were professionals. The mission came first. I found Martinez and Kowalski among Spear's men. Martinez had a bandage around his head but seemed otherwise intact. Kowalski had lost his helmet and most of his equipment, but had somehow managed to acquire a German MP-40 submachine gun. "Thought you bought it, Donovan," Kowalski said, grinning despite the dark circles under his eyes. "Landed in a cow pasture about 3 miles from here," Martinez added. "Spent half the night avoiding German patrols." Reynolds was there too, setting up a .30 caliber machine gun in the window of the building Winters had indicated. He'd twisted his knee during the landing but had still managed to reach the assembly area. "Fisher?" I asked, not seeing him among the men. Martinez's expression darkened. "His chute got caught in a tree. Germans found him before he could cut himself free." I nodded, accepting the news without comment. There would be time to mourn later. Right now we had a job to do. The German counterattack came at 10:30, ours. First, mortar fire began falling around the village, forcing us to take cover. Then, from the direction of Carentan, came the rumble of engines. 2 SID KFZ. 251 half-tracks appeared on the road, followed by a company of infantry. Reynolds opened up with the .30 cal, raking the lead half-track. The armor-piercing rounds punched through the thin skin of the vehicle, and I saw the driver slump forward. The half-track veered off the road, crashing into a stone wall. The German infantry deployed quickly, taking cover behind hedgerows and buildings. Martinez and I fired from our position, forcing a German squad to retreat from an exposed flank. Kowalski, with his captured MP-40, moved to a position where he could cover the approach to our building. "Just like Brooklyn, huh, Donovan?" he shouted over the gunfire. "Except these guys shoot back." It was a reference to our urban combat training, which Kowalski, a New York native, had always excelled at. The joke, small as it was, helped steady our nerves. The firefight lasted nearly an hour. The Germans, realizing they faced determined resistance, eventually withdrew, leaving behind their disabled half-track and a dozen dead. We'd suffered casualties too. 3 men killed and 7 wounded, including Lieutenant Harris, who'd taken shrapnel from a mortar. As we regrouped, checking ammunition and treating wounds, Winters gathered the NCOs for a quick briefing. "Good work, men," he said, his voice calm despite the intensity of the recent fighting. "We've been ordered to hold this position. The beach landings are proceeding on schedule. 4th Infantry Division should be linking up with us by tomorrow morning." "Any word on the rest of the regiment, sir?" I asked. Winters shook his head. "Still scattered, but they're fighting. Colonel Sink is establishing a command post near Utah Beach. For now, we hold here." That night, as we maintained our defensive positions, I found myself sharing a foxhole with Martinez and Reynolds. Despite the danger, there was an odd sense of calm. We'd survived the jump, the landing, and our first real engagement. We'd found each other against the odds. "You know," Martinez said quietly, cleaning his M1 by feel in the darkness. "My grandfather fought in the Spanish-American War. Said the worst part wasn't the fighting. It was not knowing if the guy next to you would stand his ground." Reynolds, typically taciturn, surprised us by responding. "Don't have to worry about that here." "No," I agreed. "You don't." That was the essence of the airborne. We jumped into hell together, fought together, and if necessary, died together. But we never left each other behind. The next day, elements of the 4th Infantry Division indeed linked up with us, pushing inland from Utah Beach. Our scattered airborne division gradually coalesced, company by company, platoon by platoon. The drop that had seemed like a disaster on that first night gradually revealed its success. Despite being scattered, we had accomplished most of our objectives, confusing the German response and securing vital crossroads and bridges. Our war was just beginning. There would be Holland, Bastogne, and the push into Germany still to come. Many of the men sharing foxholes with me that night in Normandy wouldn't live to see VE Day, but in those early hours after the drop, something unbreakable had formed between us. Something that transcended friendship or even brotherhood. The night we jumped into Normandy, we weren't just soldiers anymore. We were airborne. And airborne. Soldiers stand together, even when they fall far from where they were meant to land.
Sergeant William Bill Hargrove, 25 years old, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The night sky explodes around me as I plummet into a hail of anti-aircraft and tracer fire. My body tumbles violently through the darkness, nearly 100 pounds of combat gear threatening to tear me apart before my parachute can deploy. The deafening roar of anti-aircraft guns below drowns out my racing heartbeat as the cold air slashes across my face. This isn't the practice jump we trained for. This is chaos unleashed. A blinding flash explodes just 50 yards away. Another C-47 disintegrating in midair, silhouettes of men scattering like rag dolls against the inferno. I force my eyes away, focusing on the immediate terror of my own descent. The altimeter on my wrist is impossible to read in. The darkness, making every second an eternity of free fall. The violent jerk of my parachute deploying slams through my body like a physical blow. The sudden silence after the cacophony of the aircraft is jarring, almost unnatural. Now I drift through the Norman sky like a specter, watching tracers crisscross below me in deadly geometric patterns hunting for targets. For me, through gaps in the clouds, I glimpse the patchwork landscape of Normandy illuminated by muzzle flashes and burning wreckage. Nothing matches our briefing maps. Nothing looks like our designated drop zone. The distant thunder of naval bombardment rolls across the countryside from the direction of Utah Beach, but I'm disoriented, unable to use it to navigate. Other paratroopers float around me like ghostly apparitions, some dangerously close, others drifting far from where they should be. In the eerie half-light, I can make out the spearhead patches of the 101st Airborne on some of their helmets. Brothers in arms, scattered to the winds by the brutal reality of combat jumping. The ground rushes up faster than expected. I brace for impact, knees bent, body tensed as we've practiced countless times. But nothing in our training prepared me for landing in water up to my waist. The shock of cold liquid closes around my boots and rapidly climbs my legs. A flooded field, deliberately inundated by the Germans to drown paratroopers like me. We called ourselves the Floating Ghosts, long before the brass painted white spooks on our helmets. Paratroopers of the 506th PIR, 101st Airborne. We trained to appear from nowhere, strike hard and vanish before the enemy knew what hit them. But on the night of June 5th, 1944, I learned what it truly meant to be a ghost. To float between life and death, between sanity and madness. Your existence reduced to a cruel cosmic joke played out across the Norman countryside. My training at Camp Takawa seems like a lifetime ago now. I was a different man then. Younger, in ways that had nothing to do with time. We climbed Currahee Mountain 3 times a week in full gear, ran 5 miles before breakfast, jumped from mock towers until the motion became as natural as walking. But nothing prepares you for the moment when you leap from an aircraft into combat, when the abstract notion of war becomes the concrete reality of killing or being killed. Colonel Sink had gathered us 3 days before D-Day. I can still picture him standing before the regiment, his face grim but determined. Men, what you'll be doing in the next few days is the most important mission of this war. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over us. You're going to be the first Americans to set foot in occupied France.
Your job is to secure the causeways leading from Utah Beach and prevent German reinforcements from reaching our landing forces. He showed us maps, outlined objectives, walked us through the drop zones and assembly areas. It all seemed straightforward on paper, but war, I would soon learn, has no respect for plans. The night before the jump, tension hung in the air, like a physical presence. Men wrote letters home, cleaned weapons, checked equipment with obsessive precision. I sat on my cot, staring at a photograph of my parents and younger sister, wondering if I'd ever see them again. Corporal Jenkins, a wiry Texan from my stick, dropped down beside me. "Got a light, Hargrove?" he asked, an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. I passed him my lighter. "Thought you didn't smoke." "I don't," he said, inhaling deeply anyway. "But if there's ever a time to start, it's the night before jumping into Hitler's backyard." We sat in silence for a while, the smoke curling between us. "You scared?" Jenkins finally asked, his voice barely audible. I thought about lying, then nodded. "Yeah, you?" "Terrified," he admitted with a short laugh. "But you know what scares me more than the Krauts? Letting you guys down." He looked around at the other men in our stick, each absorbed in their own pre-combat rituals. "Sink says we're a band of brothers. Guess that makes us family now." I nodded, grateful for his honesty. "Then I guess we better make sure the whole family comes home." "Damn straight," Jenkins replied, crushing out his half-smoked cigarette. "Get some sleep, Hargrove. Tomorrow we make history, but sleep wouldn't. Come." I lay awake, listening to the sounds of men preparing for war, the metallic clicks of weapons being assembled, muffled conversations, occasional laughter too loud to be genuine. By the time we boarded the C-47s the following evening, I'd been awake for nearly 24 hours. Our faces were blackened with cork and grease. Over our uniforms, we wore bandoliers of ammunition, grenades, medical kits, entrenching, tools, K-rations, enough equipment to fight for several days without resupply. The cricket in my pocket, a small metal noisemaker that would allow us to identify each other in the darkness, felt absurdly inadequate protection against the confusion of night combat. The flight across the English Channel started smoothly enough. Some men slept, others prayed. I stared at the patch of floor between my boots, trying to recall the terrain features of our drop zone near Saint-Marie-du-Mont. But as we approached the Cotentin Peninsula, everything changed. Cloud banks forced our pilots to fly lower. German anti-aircraft batteries opened up, filling the sky with deadly metal formations scattered. Navigation became impossible. And then I was jumping into chaos. The blast of air as I exited the aircraft hit like a physical blow. For a terrible moment, I tumbled uncontrolled through the darkness. Then came the jerk of my parachute deploying, the sudden silence as I drifted down toward unknown territory. The descent was surreal. Flashes of anti-aircraft fire illuminating the countryside below like some hellish lightning storm. The distant thunder of naval bombardment from the coast. The dark shapes of other paratroopers floating in the night sky. I struggled to orient myself, searching for landmarks, but nothing matched the maps we'd studied. My landing was hard, in a flooded field that the Germans had deliberately inundated to deter airborne landings. Water up to my waist cushioned my fall, but immediately presented a new danger. Weighed down by equipment, paratroopers could easily drown in such conditions. I fought to release my harness, heart pounding as the water soaked through my uniform. Free of my parachute, I crawled to firmer ground and lay flat, listening intently. Scattered gunfire erupted from various directions. An orange glow to the east suggested a burning aircraft. But of my stick, my unit, my objectives, I had no idea. I was alone in enemy territory. I pulled out my cricket and clicked it once. Click-clack, then waited for the response. Nothing. I tried. Again, slightly louder. Still nothing. Fighting rising panic, I consulted my compass, trying to determine my position. I had to find other paratroopers, assemble, complete our mission. The alternative, wandering alone until captured or killed, was unthinkable. I moved cautiously,
Through the darkness, cricket in one hand, M1 Garand in the other, every shadow seemed to conceal a German patrol. Every sound, frogs in the marshes, wind in the hedgerows, became the enemy approaching. Time stretched and distorted until minutes felt like hours. After what seemed an eternity, I heard voices ahead, American voices speaking in hushed tones. I approached carefully, clicked my cricket twice. The response came immediately. 2 clicks in return. Flash, I whispered the challenge. Thunder, came the countersign. I moved forward into a small copse of trees where 6 paratroopers had gathered. None from my stick, but all from the 506th. Staff Sergeant Millard seemed to be in charge, a stocky Kentuckian with a reputation for unflappable calm. Hargrove, right? He said. 506th E Company? I nodded, relief washing over me at finding friendly faces. Any idea where we are? I asked. Millard shook his head grimly. Nowhere near our DZ, that's for damn sure. Best guess? Puts us about 5 miles northwest of where we should be. What about the rest of the regiment? Scattered all to hell, a corporal named Woodson put in. We've run into guys from all 3 regiments of the division. Nobody's where they're supposed to be. Millard spread a map on the ground, shielding his flashlight with his hand to avoid showing light. We're going to head for our original objective. This causeway here, he indicated a spot on the map. With any luck, we'll run into more of our boys along the way. What about the equipment bundles? I asked, thinking of the heavy weapons and radios that had been dropped separately. Haven't seen a single one, Millard replied. We'll make do with what we've got. What we had was 7 men armed with rifles, a few grenades, and limited ammunition. Not exactly the overwhelming force we'd planned to deploy against the German defenses. We moved out just before dawn, walking in single file through the hedgerow country of Normandy. These hedgerows, ancient earthen barriers topped with dense vegetation, compartmentalized the landscape into a maze of small fields. Perfect terrain for defense, terrible for attackers, especially attackers who didn't know exactly where they were. The first hint of daylight revealed the true extent of the airborne mishap. Parachutes hung from trees and telephone poles. Equipment bundles lay scattered across fields, some unreachable in the flooded areas. And everywhere, small groups of paratroopers wandered, trying to orient themselves and locate their objectives. We encountered 2 more groups from the 506th, bringing our strength to 15 men. Millard, now commanding this ad hoc unit, maintained our focus on reaching the causeway. But around 0800, as we approached a small Norman village, we encountered our first Germans. They appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, a patrol of about 10 men on bicycles, as surprised to see us as we were to see them. For a frozen moment, both groups stared at each other in shock. Then everyone moved at once. "Take cover!" Millard shouted as we dived for the hedgerows. On either side of the road, the Germans abandoned their bicycles, scrambling for positions in the ditch opposite us. Gunfire erupted, the sharp crack of our M1s contrasting with the distinctive sound of German MP-40 submachine guns. I pressed myself into the earth, trying to make my body as small as possible as bullets snapped overhead. Through gaps, in the hedgerow I glimpsed German helmets, the distinctive coal scuttle shape unlike anything American, and fired whenever one appeared. The firefight lasted perhaps 10 minutes, though it felt much longer. When it was over, 7 Germans lay dead or wounded on the road. The rest had retreated toward the village. We had 1 man injured. Private Mendoza had taken a bullet through his left arm, but it was a clean wound that our medic, Taylor, was able to bandage. They'll be back with reinforcements, Millard said, checking his ammunition. We need to move out now. We bypassed the village, cutting across fields and through orchards. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning, mist and revealing a countryside that, but for the war raging across it, would have been idyllic. Occasionally, we heard the distant rumble of naval gunfire from the coast, a reminder that the main invasion force was landing on the beaches. Around midday, we reached a farmhouse where 3 more paratroopers had taken shelter. One of them, Lieutenant Winters from E Company. With an officer now present, Millard relinquished command, briefing Winters on our situation and objective. Winters listened intently, then modified our plan. The causeway is still our priority, but we've got another problem. Intelligence shows a German artillery battery about a mile from here, in position to fire on Utah Beach. We need to take it out. The battery, he explained, consisted of 4 105mm howitzers protected by perhaps 50 infantry. Against this, we had 19 men with rifles, a few machine guns salvaged from equipment bundles found along the way, and limited ammunition. We'll attack at last light, Winters decided. They won't be expecting such a small force to assault a fixed position. The hours until dusk stretched endlessly. We cleaned weapons, redistributed ammunition, ate cold. K-rations. The tension was palpable, each man alone with his thoughts, wondering if this would be his last day alive. Jenkins, whom I'd finally found among the scattered paratroopers, sat beside me as we prepared. Hell of a way to start the war, huh? He said, checking the action on his rifle. I nodded. Not exactly how they drew it up in the briefings. You know what's funny? Jenkins continued. Back in England, I was so worried about jumping into the dark, about my chute not opening. Never occurred to me that finding the enemy would be the easy part. Finding them is easy, I agreed. Beating them is the trick. Jenkins grinned, though it didn't reach his eyes. We're paratroopers, Hargrove. We're supposed to be surrounded. The attack began at 1930 hours, with the setting sun at our backs. We approached from 3 directions, using the hedgerows for cover. The German position came into view. 4 howitzers in a cleared field, surrounded by foxholes, and a few machine gun nests. They were indeed preparing to fire on the beaches, the guns elevated and pointed eastward. Winter's plan was simple but effective. 2 squads would provide covering fire, while a third, led by him personally, would assault directly into the battery position. I was assigned to Winter's assault squad alongside Jenkins and 5 others. At the lieutenant's signal, our covering, fire opened up. The Germans, caught by surprise, scrambled to respond. In that moment of confusion, we charged across the open ground toward the nearest gun emplacement. The distance was perhaps 75 yards, but it felt like miles. Bullets kicked up dirt around us. A man to my left, I never learned his name, crumpled mid-stride. Jenkins and I reached the first howitzer together, tossing grenades into the crew pit before diving in after the explosions. What followed was the most intense 20 minutes of my life. A swirling, chaotic close-quarters fight among the gun positions. We moved from howitzer to howitzer, clearing each position with grenades and rifle fire. The Germans fought desperately, but our surprise attack had shattered their organization. I remember fragments more than a coherent sequence. The concussive thump of grenades, the heat of my rifle barrel after firing an entire clip, the metallic smell of blood, the expressions of men in their final moments. I remember Jenkins, beside me until suddenly he wasn't, shot through the throat by a German officer whom I then killed with my combat knife when my rifle jammed. And then it was over. The battery was destroyed, its crews dead or fleeing. We had lost 3 men, killed and 6 wounded, nearly half our already small force. As we placed thermite grenades on the howitzer breech blocks to render them permanently inoperable, I felt hollow, disconnected from myself, as if watching the scene from somewhere above. Good work, Hargrove, Winters said, appearing beside me. His face was streaked with dirt and powder residue, but his eyes remained clear and focused. We need to move out. The causeway still needs securing. I nodded mechanically, reloading my rifle with hands that seemed to belong to someone else. Around me, other paratroopers were collecting German weapons and ammunition to supplement our dwindling supplies. We buried our dead quickly but respectfully, marking their positions to be properly recovered later. The wounded who could walk would continue with us. 2 with more serious injuries would remain hidden in a nearby farmhouse until medical help could reach them. As night fell again, we moved toward our original objective, guided by the distant flashes of combat near the beaches. The psychological fog that had enveloped me after the battery fight began to lift slightly. replaced by a strange clarity. Each sound, each sensation seemed hyper-real. The weight of my helmet, the crickets chirping incongruously amid the sounds of war, the taste of dust in my mouth. We reached the causeway shortly after midnight, linking up with elements of other scattered airborne units that had converged on the same objective. Through some miracle of training or leadership or simple human determination, enough paratroopers had found their way to their assigned targets that the mission, against all odds, was being accomplished. By dawn on June 7th, we had secured our section of the causeway. Looking eastward, we could see American tanks and vehicles beginning to move inland from Utah Beach. The invasion, whatever its cost, would not fail. That night, exhausted beyond measure, I sat with my back against a stone wall in the small village we had liberated. Around me, other paratroopers slept or stood watch. From a nearby hedgerow came the distinctive click-clack of a cricket, someone still trying to find their unit in the dark. I reached into my pocket for my own cricket, but my fingers found Jenkins' lighter instead. I hadn't realized I'd taken it after he fell. I flicked it open, watching the small flame dance in the darkness, a tiny light against the vast night. We had called ourselves the Floating Ghosts, with the arrogance of the living. Now I understood what it truly meant. We had jumped into darkness and emerged as something different, not quite living, not quite dead. Men caught between worlds, floating through a landscape of destruction, appearing where least expected, vanishing again into the chaos of war. I closed the lighter, returning it to my pocket alongside my cricket. In the distance, artillery flashed, the war continuing its relentless advance across France. Tomorrow would bring new objectives, new battles, new losses. But for now, in this brief moment of stillness, I allowed myself to acknowledge what I had become, a ghost floating through the darkness of history's most terrible war, and somehow, against all odds, still alive.
Oberfeldwebel Werner Kruger, 27 years old, 3rd Company Jäger Regiment, 100th Jäger Division, born in Dresden, Saxony. The concrete dust hung thick in the air, choking, blinding. I couldn't tell if the ringing in my ears was from the Soviet artillery or the blood pounding through my skull. 3 days without sleep. The ruins of the apartment block offered momentary shelter, but the Russians were coming. "Feuer!" I screamed, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of war. Our MG-42 opened up, cutting through the shadows where Soviet infantry advanced through the rubble. Muzzle flashes illuminated ghostly faces for split seconds before they disappeared into the chaos. The machine gun's rate of fire, we called it Hitler's buzzsaw for a reason, stitched death across the courtyard. Dieter collapsed beside me, a neat hole where his right eye had been. No time to mourn. I grabbed his ammunition pouches, counted the grenades, 5 left. The radio crackled with desperate calls for reinforcement that would never come. A T-34 ground around the corner, its engine growling like some primordial beast. We were out of Panzerfausts. "Fall back," I ordered, but as I turned, I saw most of my squad was already dead. Stalingrad wasn't a battle anymore. It was a meat grinder. And we were the meat. The transfer to the 100th Jaeger Division had been a point of pride. September 1942. Germany was still winning then, or so we believed. Light infantry specially trained for mountain and forest warfare, now repurposed for the urban hell of Stalingrad. We had earned a reputation for toughness on the Eastern Front. My previous unit had fought through the early Russian campaign, from the border to the outskirts of Moscow, before the winter of '41 taught us that Russia wouldn't fall like France. After recovering from frostbite that nearly cost me 2 toes, I found myself promoted and reassigned. New unit, same war, but now we were pushing toward a city bearing Stalin's name on the Volga River. "It'll be over by Christmas, Hauptmann," Weiss told us as our train rumbled eastward. Take Stalingrad, cut the Volga, and the Russians will have to sue for peace. The countryside gave way to steppe, endless and golden under the late summer sun. The veteran soldiers among us knew better than to believe in quick victories anymore, but we kept such thoughts to ourselves. Feldwebel Lehmann, a stocky Berliner, with a boxer's broken nose, caught me staring at the horizon. "First time to Stalingrad?" he asked with a smirk. "Funny," I replied. "Been fighting since Poland." He offered a cigarette, lighting it with a Zippo he claimed to have taken from an American volunteer with the British in Africa. "This will be different, house to house, room to room, the worst kind of fighting." I took a long drag. "Worse than the forests outside Moscow? The swamps near Leningrad?" "You'll see," he said, eyes suddenly distant. "Urban fighting is a special kind of hell. Our transport halted 20 kilometers from the city. The distant rumble of artillery provided a constant backdrop as we assembled, checking weapons and equipment. My squad consisted of 8 men. Lehmann, who became my second, Dieter Schmidt, a baby-faced Bavarian who handled our MG-42 like it was an extension of his body, Hans Müller, his assistant, and 4 riflemen, Becker, Hoffmann, Klein, and Wagner. Young men with young men's confidence, all armed with Mauser 98K rifles, except for Klein, who carried an MP-40 submachine gun. We advanced on foot under a clear sky, the autumn air still warm in the daytime. The closer we got to Stalingrad, the more evident the destruction became. The Luftwaffe had been pounding the city for weeks. Columns of smoke rose like black pillars supporting a ceiling of dark clouds. "God's teeth," whispered Hoffmann, a former seminary student. "It looks like the end of the world." "Just the end of Russia's world," Klein replied with unearned confidence. We made contact with elements of the 6th Army who had been fighting in the outskirts. Haggard men with 1,000-yard stares. One sergeant, his uniform caked with dust and blood, laughed when he heard we were reinforcements. "Fresh meat," he said, too loudly. "The city eats soldiers for breakfast." Our first night was spent in the remnants of a Soviet collective farm on the city's edge. The wheat fields had been trampled by tanks and men, the farmhouse reduced to a pile of timber and brick. We dug foxholes amid the wreckage, establishing a perimeter as darkness fell. At 0430, we moved into the industrial district. Factory buildings loomed like monoliths, their windows shattered eyes watching our approach. Hauptmann Weiss briefed us with a map spread on the hood of a Kübelwagen. "The tractor factory is our primary objective," he said, pointing to a massive complex northeast of our position. "The Russians have turned it into a fortress. We'll clear the residential blocks first, then approach from the south." The residential area consisted of workers' apartments, 4- and 5-story concrete buildings arranged in grids. As we advanced up the main boulevard, the silence was unnerving. No civilians, no enemy soldiers, just the distant thump of artillery and the closer crack of sniper fire striking around us. "They're watching," Lehmann muttered. The first real contact came at the intersection of 2 broad avenues. A barricade of overturned trolleys and rubble blocked our path. Sniper fire cracked from upper windows, dropping 2 men from the platoon, advancing parallel to ours. "Cover!" I shouted, diving behind a destroyed staff car. Our MG-42 opened up. Dieter, hosing the windows of the suspected sniper nests while we assessed the situation. A Panzer IV from our supporting armor element rumbled forward, its 75mm main gun elevating toward the upper floors of the apartment block. The tank fired, the concussion slapping against my chest even from 30 meters away. Concrete and dust erupted from the 5th floor. The Panzer fired twice more, turning the potential sniper positions into rubble. "Forward! Clear the buildings!" Hauptmann Weiss ordered. This began our initiation into urban combat. Each building had to be cleared room by room, floor by floor. The Soviets had fortified apartments, knocked holes between walls to create shooting positions, and booty-trapped staircases. We learned quickly, never silhouette yourself in doorways. Always throw grenades before entering a room, and keep your weapon ready. 3 hours and half a block later, we had suffered our first casualty. Wagner took a burst from a Soviet DP, machine gun hidden behind a false wall. The rounds tore through his chest, killing him instantly. We responded with grenades and concentrated fire, but the Russians melted away through their rat runs in the walls. "We need to collapse the buildings," Alamein suggested during a brief respite. "Deny them the high ground." Hauptmann Weiss nodded grimly. "Engineering units are stretched thin. We use what explosives we have and keep pushing." By nightfall, we had advanced only 4 blocks and lost 3 men from our company. We set up defensive positions in a cleared apartment complex, establishing interlocking fields of fire and tripwires on the approaches. Nobody expected to sleep much. In the darkness, Hoffman quietly read from a small Bible. Klein cleaned his MP-40 for the 3rd time. Müller had acquired a bottle of vodka from somewhere and passed it around sparingly. "To Wagner," he said as the bottle reached me. I took a swig, the liquor burning a path down my throat. To Wagner, the night passed with sporadic firefights and the constant background of artillery. The Russians probed our lines twice, but were beaten back. Dawn arrived with the promise of another bloody day. As I checked our positions, Dieter approached with a chipped enamel kettle. "Coffee, Herr Oberfeldwebel," he said, holding out a tin cup. "Real coffee, not that ersatz shit." "Where'd you get it?" I asked, taking the steaming cup gratefully. He shrugged. "Found a stash in one of the apartments. Seems a waste to leave it for the Ivans." These small comforts became precious. We formed rituals around them. Coffee at dawn, cigarettes shared. After surviving another building cleared, the exchange of personal items for safekeeping before particularly dangerous assaults. "If I don't make it," Klein told me one morning, pressing a wallet into my hand, "make sure my girl gets this. Photo inside." I nodded, not mentioning that mail from Stalingrad was increasingly sporadic. The city was becoming isolated as Soviet. Pressure mounted from the north. We pushed toward the tractor factory for 8 days, each one bloodier than the last. Our company's strength dropped from 150 men to less than 80. The promised reinforcements didn't materialize. Supply lines stretched thin, and ammunition became precious. On the 9th day, we faced our most brutal fighting yet. The approaches to the factory complex were open ground, covered by interlocking Soviet defensive positions. Our supporting armor was down to 3 operational panzers. "We go at noon," Hauptmann Weiss informed us. "Artillery will provide cover, then a smokescreen. The tanks lead. We follow close behind." At precisely 1200, our artillery opened up. What little remained of it. The barrage lasted 5 minutes, hardly enough to suppress the Soviet defenses. The smoke shells came next, and we moved out behind our armored support. We made it halfway across before the Soviet anti-tank guns opened up. The lead panzer took a direct hit, its turret flying off in a spectacular explosion. The second tank ground to a halt, tracks damaged. Only the third continued forward, its machine guns blazing. "Keep moving," I shouted to my squad, now down to 5 men, including myself. Soviet machine guns cut through the smoke, the tracers visible like deadly threads in the air. Hoffman went down first, shot through the throat. Becker fell seconds later. We reached the factory wall with just Alamein, Dieter, and myself. The interior of the tractor factory was a nightmare landscape of metal and shadow. The Soviets had transformed the industrial machinery into fortifications. Welding equipment had been repurposed for flamethrowers. Every catwalk and gantry held snipers. We fought for hours, gaining ground meter by meter. By 1700, we had secured a section of the assembly line, establishing a defensive position with the remnants of our company. 28 men, most wounded, all exhausted. "Hold until relieved," came the order from battalion headquarters, now a kilometer behind us. "Reinforcements coming at dawn," Alamein spat. "Reinforcements? Like the ones we were promised yesterday? And the day before?" I had no answer. We distributed the remaining ammunition established watch rotations, and treated the wounded as best we could. Our medic had been killed 2 days earlier. The Soviets attacked at 0200. They came silently at first, infiltrating through the dark factory floor, then with overwhelming force. 34s burst through the walls, their engines screaming and tracks grinding over debris and bodies alike. "Fall back," I ordered, firing my MP-40 in short, controlled bursts. "Secondary position." Dieter set up his MG-42 on a raised platform, providing covering fire. The distinctive sound of the weapon, like canvas tearing, gave us precious seconds to withdraw. I threw my last 2 grenades to slow the Soviet advance. We retreated to a foreman's office with thick walls, establishing a hasty defense with the 14 men who made it. Alamein had taken shrapnel in his leg but refused evacuation. "How much?" "Ammunition?" I asked. 2 belts for the MG, Dieter replied. "Maybe 200 rounds total for the rifles. 3 grenades." Dawn came with no sign of reinforcement. The factory had fallen except for our small pocket of resistance. The radio crackled with orders to hold at all costs, but the voices sounded distant, disconnected from our reality. At 0900, a white phosphorus grenade landed in our position. The screaming began immediately as men caught in its burning embrace clawed at their melting skin. We abandoned the office, retreating deeper into the complex with just 8 men. By noon, it was down to 4. Myself, Alamein, Dieter, and Klein. We found ourselves trapped in the basement level, Soviet forces closing from all sides. Alamein couldn't walk anymore, his wounded leg now gangrenous. "Leave me," he said, checking the chamber of his Walther P-38. "I'll buy you time." "No man left behind," I insisted. He laughed bitterly. "That's the Americans, Kruger. We're pragmatists, remember?" In the end, I couldn't argue. We left him with the last grenade and most of our remaining ammunition. His final stand bought us 20 minutes, enough time to find a drainage tunnel that led outside the factory perimeter. 3 weeks later, only Klein and I remained alive from our original squad. The Soviets had launched their massive counteroffensive Operation Uranus, encircling the entire 6th Army. We were trapped in the Stalingrad pocket with dwindling supplies and no hope of relief. In January 1943, with temperatures dropping to negative 30 degrees Celsius and starvation ravaging our ranks, Field Marshal Paulus surrendered the 6th Army. Of the original 330,000 German soldiers who had fought for Stalingrad, barely 5,000 would ever return to Germany. Klein died of pneumonia in a Soviet prison camp near Kazan in 1944. I survived 6 years of captivity before returning to a Dresden that no longer existed, destroyed in the Allied bombing. Sometimes in my dreams, I'm still in that factory, hearing the distinctive sound of Dieter's MG-42 cutting through. The darkness, buying us seconds of life with each burst. The concrete dust still fills my lungs, and the faces of my squad appear in the muzzle flashes, young men who believed in final victory until the very end. Stalingrad taught us the truth. There are no winners in urban combat, only survivors, and even survival comes at a cost few can comprehend. Sergeant David Whitmore, 28 years old, Special Air Service, B Squadron, born in Manchester, England. The sand burned through my elbows as I pressed deeper into the earth. Sweat ran in rivulets down my face, stinging my eyes, but I dared not move to wipe it away. My breathing slowed to an imperceptible rhythm, matching the waves that crashed against the distant shore. 300 meters ahead, the German officer stepped from his staff car, stretching in the Sicilian heat. I felt the familiar pulse in my finger as it rested outside the trigger guard. My spotter, Reynolds, lay motionless beside me, watching. Through his binoculars. "Wind from the west, 8 kilometers. Range confirmed at 310 meters, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the cicadas. The number 4 Mark I T. Lee Enfield felt alive in my hands, an extension of my body rather than a tool. I'd wrapped the wooden stock with burlap strips to eliminate shine and prevent slippage from sweat. The standard 3.5x number 32 telescopic sight gave me the clarity I needed at this range. As I inhaled, I followed the terminal aiming point technique we'd been taught. The crosshairs settled not on center mass, but slightly, lower than the officer's chest, compensating for the natural rise of the .303 British round at this distance. One shot, one death, one less commander for the German defense of Sicily. Then the unthinkable happened. The scope's reticle suddenly shifted, a hairline crack spreading across my view. The precision instrument, my eye into another world, was failing at the most critical moment. "Scope's cracked," I muttered. Reynolds tensed beside me. Jerry patrol approaching from the east. 2 minutes, maybe less. No time to adjust. No time to retreat. One chance at the shot, with a compromised scope and approaching enemy. I exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The SAS isn't for everyone. That's what they told us during selection in the windswept highlands of Scotland, as men dropped around me, broken by the relentless training. When I joined in 42, I'd already seen enough combat with the Royal Fusiliers to know that war wasn't about glory. In North Africa, I'd learned valuable lessons in patience and precision, qualities that caught the attention of my commanding officer. "Whitmore has a gift," he'd written in his recommendation. "Natural marksman, unnaturally calm under fire." I wasn't calm. I was just better at hiding my fear. Our insertion into Sicily came 3 days before the main Allied invasion. Operation Husky would need accurate intelligence on German defensive positions, and the brass wanted several high-value targets eliminated to throw the enemy command into disarray. Reynolds and I were dropped in the dead of night by Felucca, a local fishing boat crewed by Italian resistance. The moon was new, providing perfect cover as we slipped ashore 10 miles from Gela. "Remember," Captain Morton had briefed us, "you've got 72 hours. Position yourselves near the crossroads outside Gela by 0430 on the 10th. Target will pass through in a convoy heading to the coastal defenses. After the hit, make your way to these coordinates for extraction." He'd pointed to a cove 3 miles inland. "The invasion begins at dawn on the 10th. Be there by 1000 hours or you're on your own." The Mediterranean air clung to us as we moved inland, weighed down by our equipment. My rifle was wrapped in canvas to keep out the sand. Reynolds carried our radio, spare ammunition, and rations. We traveled only at night, covering ourselves with brush during daylight hours. On the first night, we encountered a local shepherd who nearly stepped on us as we lay hidden in a dry riverbed. The old man froze when my Fairbairn Sykes knife pressed against his throat. His eyes bulged in the moonlight, terrified and confused. "Allied forces," Reynolds whispered in broken Italian. "Friends! Against Germans!" The shepherd nodded frantically, then pointed to a small path winding through the hills when we released him. We debated whether to silence him permanently. The mission couldn't be compromised. But something in the old man's eyes convinced me he was trustworthy. It was a decision that would prove critical later. By dawn on the 8th, we had reached our designated overwatch position, a small ridge overlooking the crossroads where our target would appear. The location offered excellent fields of fire with multiple escape routes through the rocky terrain behind us. We spent the day constructing our hide, blending it seamlessly into the landscape with local vegetation. The heat was oppressive, easily hitting 100 degrees by midday. Water became our most precious resource. Each sip was measured, each drop accounted for. We maintained radio silence except for our scheduled check-in at 0200 each morning. A brief, encoded transmission that simply confirmed we were alive and on schedule. "What do you think happens after?" Reynolds asked during our second night, his voice low as we adjusted our position. "After what?" After this, the war. I checked the action on my rifle, ensuring it was clean of the omnipresent dust. Don't think about after. There's only now, only the mission. Reynolds nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied. He was younger than me, just 23, and still believed in a future. I'd abandoned such luxuries months ago in the desert, watching friends disappear into the sand, swallowed by mortars and machine gun fire. Dawn on July 9th arrived with a strange stillness. Even the birds seemed to sense the impending invasion, their usual songs absent from the olive groves surrounding us. We received confirmation at 0200 that the operation was proceeding as planned. Our target, Oberst Wilhelm Schreiber, commander of the 15th Panzergrenadier Division's artillery regiment, would pass through the crossroads between 0430 and 0500. After eliminating him, we were to observe enemy movements until 2200, then make our way to the extraction point. The waiting was always the hardest part, not the physical strain. We'd been taught specific muscle relaxation techniques for extended static positioning, alternating micro-contractions to prevent cramping without visibly moving. We'd smeared burnt cork mixed with petroleum jelly on our faces and hands in irregular patterns that broke up the human outline. Every few hours, we'd shift our position by millimeters to prevent blood pooling, using the natural rhythm of wind-moved foliage to cover these adjustments. Our hide had been constructed with a slightly elevated shooting platform of compacted earth to provide drainage in case of rain and create a more stable firing position. No, it wasn't the discomfort of lying motionless for hours, or the thirst. That turned your tongue to sandpaper. It was the endless space for doubt to creep in, questioning every decision, every calculation. At 0415, Reynolds spotted the first signs of movement on the road. Vehicle approaching from the south, staff car with motorcycle escort. 3 motorcycles. I adjusted my position slightly, bringing my eye to the scope. The roads were dusty, and the vehicle was still over half a mile away, but the distinctive outline of a Mercedes staff car was unmistakable. Time to target? 3 minutes at current speed, Reynolds replied, his voice steady. Wind is from the west, 8 kilometers per hour. Humidity approximately 70%. Temperature 24 degrees Celsius. I made the necessary adjustments to my scope, accounting for the variables that would affect my bullet's trajectory. The Lee Enfield wasn't the ideal sniper rifle, but it was reliable and familiar. I'd made kills with it at over 800 meters in the right conditions. This shot, at around 300 meters, should be routine. Should be. As the convoy approached, I could make out more details. The staff car's windows were down, the morning already warm enough to make the interior uncomfortable. 2 officers sat in the back, with a driver and another soldier in front. The motorcycle escorts were positioned in a triangle formation, 2 ahead and 1 behind. Following SAS sniper protocol, I mentally ran through our SLAP checklist. Select a precise aiming point, the junction of neck and shoulder, ensuring destruction of the carotid and brachial plexus. Lead the target appropriately based on vehicle. Speed, calculate atmospheric conditions, already factored in, and determine the parallax adjustments needed for a moving target at variable distance. We'd been trained to avoid headshots when possible, too small a target with too much potential. For error, center mass was standard doctrine, but the car's frame might deflect the round at this angle. Confirm target identity, I whispered. Reynolds studied the approaching vehicle through his binoculars. Passenger in the rear right seat. Colonel's insignia visible, gray hair, matches the description. I settled the crosshairs on the point, where the colonel would be when the car reached the designated kill zone, a straight stretch of road where they'd likely maintain a steady speed. In training, we'd learned to adopt the marksmanship triangle position. Left elbow firmly planted with body weight slightly forward, right elbow at a natural angle, cheek welded to the stock in the exact same position every time. My breathing followed the 4-count rhythm we practiced relentlessly. 4 seconds in, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. I'd placed a small mesh veil over the scope and muzzle to disrupt the outline and prevent lens glare. A trick learned from Finnish snipers. A small sandbag supported the rifle's forend, eliminating micro-movements. The world narrowed to the small circle of my scope, everything else fading to insignificance. That's when I noticed it. A thin crack forming along the right edge of my scope's lens. The desert heat and the humidity of Sicily had taken their toll on the equipment. The crack wouldn't necessarily ruin the shot, but it added a new variable, an unpredictable element. No time to switch to iron sights. The convoy was entering the kill zone. The staff car slowed slightly at a dip in the road. Perfect. I made a final adjustment and began to apply pressure to the trigger. "Wait," Reynolds hissed suddenly. "Movement behind us." I held the shot, my body tensing. "Where?" "Ridge to our right, maybe 200 meters. Patrol, 4 men. They must have been sweeping the area in preparation for the colonel's passage, a standard security precaution, but one our intelligence had failed to mention. If I took the shot now, the sound would alert them to our position. We'd have minutes, maybe seconds, before they were on us. "Time to target out of kill zone?" I asked, still tracking the vehicle through my scope. 30 seconds, maximum. A decision had to be made, mission or survival, the shot or retreat. In that moment, I thought of all the Allied soldiers who would land tomorrow, facing the artillery batteries this colonel commanded. How many would die if those guns remained under his experienced leadership? "Taking the shot," I said, settling back into position. The crack in the scope had worsened, distorting the right third of my view. I would have to adjust, aiming slightly left of where I normally would. The staff car was nearly through the kill zone. I exhaled halfway, following the third lung technique taught by our Scottish instructor, letting out just enough air to stabilize but maintaining pressure in the diaphragm. I squeezed the trigger with the pad of my finger, not the joint, applying steady pressure rather than a jerk, so that the shot would come as a surprise even to me. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, the familiar sharp crack of the .303 British round echoing across the valley. I maintained my position, continuing to look through the scope, never breaking observation, as trained to confirm target effect. Through the scope, I saw the colonel's head snap back, a spray of red misting the interior of the car. The bullet's hydrostatic shock had done its work with devastating efficiency. The driver swerved violently, nearly colliding with one of the motorcycle escorts. I instinctively began the immediate post-shot drill, working the bolt smoothly to chamber another round, maintaining aim on the secondary target, the driver, in case follow-up shots were necessary, and listening to Reynolds' assessment before making any movement that might give away our position. "Hit confirmed," Reynolds said. "Target down. No time for satisfaction." "Move," I ordered, already collapsing our hide and gathering essential equipment. The rest would have to be abandoned. Shouts in German reached us from the ridge as the patrol responded to the shot. We slid down the back of our position into a narrow gully, running in a crouch toward a small olive grove 100 meters away. The morning air was split by the crack of rifle fire, bullets kicking up dirt around us. "They've spotted us," Reynolds gasped as we reached the relative cover of the trees. "Split up," I said, handing him the radio. "Meet at checkpoint 2. "Go!" We separated, using the tactics we'd drilled countless times. Divide their attention, create multiple targets, use terrain to maximum advantage. I cut south through the grove, then doubled back east, moving from cover to cover. The sound of German voices grew more distant, then louder again as another group joined the search. My lungs burned as I pushed through the rocky terrain, the rifle a dead weight across my back. A burst of machine gun fire tore through the brush to my right. Wild shots, not aimed directly at me. They were firing at shadows, uncertain of our position or number. After 20 minutes of evasion, I reached checkpoint 2, a dry stream bed marked by a distinctive lightning-struck oak. Reynolds wasn't there. I waited 5 minutes, listening to the distant sounds of the German search parties before making the difficult decision to continue to checkpoint 3. The sun was fully up now, making movement increasingly dangerous. I found a small cave formed by overhanging rocks and wedged myself inside, covering the entrance with branches. The temperature rose steadily, turning my hiding place into an oven, but I dared not move until nightfall. Hours passed. The sounds of pursuit faded, then returned, then faded again. My water supply dwindled to less than half a canteen. As dusk approached, I prepared to move out when I heard a soft rustling nearby. My knife was in my hand instantly, body tensing for combat. The branches at the cave entrance moved aside, and a weathered face appeared, the shepherd from 2 nights before. He put a finger to his lips, then gestured for me to follow. Instinct told me to trust him. He led me through paths invisible to untrained eyes, avoiding German patrols with an intimate knowledge of the landscape. After an hour of silent travel, we reached a small stone hut where, to my relief, Reynolds was waiting, his arm crudely bandaged. "Caught some shrapnel from a grenade," he explained. "These people found me hiding in an irrigation ditch." The shepherd's family, his wife and teenage son, had been sheltering Reynolds since midday. They were part of the local resistance, it seemed, and had been expecting Allied forces. The old man grinned proudly as his wife served us watered-down wine and hard bread. "Radio?" I asked. Reynolds shook his head. Had to ditch it when they got close. That complicated things. Without the radio, we couldn't call for extraction or receive updates on the invasion timeline. We would have to reach the original extraction point and hope our people were there. The shepherd's son, who spoke some English, told us the Germans had established roadblocks on all major routes following the assassination. Moving at night would be essential. He offered to guide us part way to the extraction point, using goat paths that wound through the hills. We left at 2200 hours, following our young guide through an alien landscape of shadows and whispers. Twice we froze as German patrols passed nearby, their voices carrying in the still night air. The boy moved like a ghost, his knowledge of every rock and tree uncanny in the darkness. He left us within a mile of the extraction point, pointing out the route to the cove where our boat would hopefully be waiting. Reynolds was weakening, his wound showing signs of infection despite our best efforts. I supported him as we made the final approach, both of us exhausted beyond measure. The cove appeared empty when we arrived at 0940 hours, the water unnaturally still in the morning light.
Had we missed the extraction? Was the invasion delayed? The questions hung between us as we concealed ourselves in the rocks overlooking the small beach. At precisely 1000 hours, a small fishing boat appeared around the headland.
Man in civilian clothes stood at the bow, scanning the shore. Our signal, 3 flashes with a mirror, was answered with 2 flashes from the boat. As we made our way down to the shore, the distant rumble of naval gunfire reached us. The invasion had begun. Operation Husky was underway, and the 15th Panzergrenadier Division would face it without their artillery commander. On the IA boat, a Royal Navy lieutenant handed us water and field rations. "Successful?" he asked simply. I nodded, too tired for words. Reynolds looked back at the shoreline as we pulled away. "Do you think it makes a difference? One man in all this?" I thought of the cracked scope, the split-second decision, the shepherd, family who risked everything to help strangers. Sometimes one is enough. The naval guns continued their distant thunder as our small boat slipped away from Sicily, heading toward the invasion fleet and whatever waited beyond. Corporal James Hereford, 24 years old, Special Air Service, born in Bristol, England. The wind whispered across the dunes, a constant susurration that threatened to drive a man mad after too many hours. Through my scope, I watched the Italian encampment shimmer in the heat haze, exactly 876 yards away according to my calculations. My finger rested outside the trigger guard of my Lee Enfield No. 4 T, the wooden stock warm against my cheek. I'd been in position for 14 hours, my body covered by a canvas sheet meticulously garnished with desert scrub. Sweat pooled in every crease of my uniform, but I remained motionless. Movement. An officer emerged from the command tent, gesturing emphatically. I adjusted my scope minutely, controlling my breathing. 4 days ago, this same officer had ordered the execution of Bedouin villagers suspected of aiding the British. His death would be my 13th confirmed kill since joining L Detachment. As I prepared to squeeze the trigger, something flashed in my peripheral vision. Sunlight reflecting off glass. My blood turned to ice. Another sniper, watching me. I froze completely, becoming one with the desert floor. If he had spotted me, I was already dead. 3 weeks earlier, we had parachuted into the vast emptiness of the western desert, 50 miles behind Axis lines. Captain Sterling had personally selected 8 of us for this operation: disrupt supply lines, gather intelligence, and eliminate high-value targets ahead of Montgomery's planned offensive. The western desert was perfect sniper country, flat, open, with excellent visibility. It was also merciless, unforgiving to the slightest mistake. Our insertion went smoothly under the cover of a moonless night. The desert swallowed our parachutes silently as we landed in a loose pattern across the dunes. Sergeant McQueen, our patrol leader, had us operational within 20 minutes. The 8 of us resembled desert ghosts more than men, our faces blackened with cork and grease, our uniforms faded to the exact color of the surrounding sand. Remember, we're here to be the eyes and ears of the 8th Army, McQueen whispered, as we huddled in a shallow wadi. And occasionally, its trigger finger. There were grim chuckles from the men. We all understood our purpose. The SAS wasn't formed for conventional warfare. We were here to be the knife in the dark. By dawn, we had established our forward operating base in an abandoned shepherd's hut nestled against a rocky outcropping. The location offered natural camouflage and a commanding view of the desert plateau stretching toward the Axis supply route. Cooper and Wilkins, our wireless operators, established communications with headquarters while the rest of us prepared. Our equipment. My rifle, a specially modified Lee Enfield with telescopic sight, was my most prized possession. I cleaned it meticulously, checking each component despite having done so before departure. In sniper work, the smallest imperfection could mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Intelligence reports Italian convoy movements through Sector 4, roughly 15 miles southwest, McQueen announced after a brief radio transmission. Reinforcements moving up to support Rommel's flank. Command wants us to monitor strength and composition before considering interdiction. Bennett, my spotter, nodded toward me. Looks like we'll be getting our suntan after all, Jimmy, I forced. A smile, but my mind was already calculating trajectories, wind speeds, and firing positions. Unlike some of the others who had transferred from conventional units, I'd been a gamekeeper before the war. I understood the patience required to track, to wait, to become invisible. The desert was simply a different kind of hunting ground. At 0200 the following morning, Bennett and I departed base, carrying only essential equipment: my rifle, his spotting scope, water, emergency rations, and a signaling mirror. We moved slowly, methodically, never breaking the horizon line or disturbing the natural pattern of the landscape. By 0530, we had reached our predetermined observation post overlooking the main supply route. Vehicle approaching, Bennett whispered after several hours of silence. Through my scope, I watched an Italian staff car emerge from the heat haze, followed by 2 transport trucks. Looks like a colonel, based on the markings. Range? I asked, making minute adjustments to my scope. 820 yards, wind from the east at approximately 5 knots, Bennett replied. his voice calm and methodical. I steadied my breathing, entering the familiar state of focused detachment. The world narrowed to my scope, the crosshairs settling on the officer's chest as he stepped from the vehicle. I squeezed the trigger on the exhale. The rifle's report cracked across the desert. Through my scope, I watched the colonel crumple to the ground as his subordinates scrambled for cover. Chaos erupted as soldiers spilled from the transport trucks, firing blindly into the surrounding desert. Target down, Bennett confirmed. Time to disappear. We retreated using a pre-planned route that kept us below the ridgeline, crawling backward for the first 100 yards to minimize dust disturbance. By the time any search party organized, we would be ghosts. Back at our forward base, McQueen received our report with a satisfied nod. Good work. That should disrupt their command structure for at least a few days. Headquarters will be pleased. The next week followed a similar pattern. Observe, report, occasionally eliminate high-value targets. We sabotaged fuel dumps, cut communication lines, and sowed confusion throughout the enemy's rear echelon. The psychological impact of our operations extended far beyond the actual damage inflicted. The Italians began moving in larger groups, wasting resources on unnecessary security measures, their nerves fraying under the constant threat of unseen attackers. But war has a way of balancing scales. During our second week, Cooper intercepted communication suggesting the enemy had deployed specialist counter-sniper teams. The hunters were becoming the hunted. They're bringing in mountain troops from the Alpine regiments, McQueen informed us during our evening briefing. Men used to stalking in the Dolomites. They'll be looking specifically for us. A heavy silence fell over our group. We all understood the implications. The desert, which had been our ally, could just as easily conceal those hunting us. Adjust. Your patterns, McQueen continued. No more than 8 hours in any position. Alternate routes, vary your timing, and watch the sun. Mirror flashes have given away better men than you lot. That night, I checked my equipment with even greater care, applying extra tape to eliminate any potential reflection from metal surfaces. Bennett watched me with knowing eyes. Getting worried, Jimmy? I shook my head. Respectful. There's a difference. The following morning, we received new orders. Italian officers were gathering at a forward command post near El Alamein, planning a counter-offensive against Montgomery's positions. Our mission was simple. Eliminate the command. Structure. Create confusion ahead of the British advance. Bennett and I departed at 0100, moving more cautiously than ever before. The knowledge of enemy snipers transformed the landscape. Every shadow concealed potential threat. Every unusual formation a possible hide. We traveled 5 miles to reach our observation point, a slight depression behind a cluster of weather-worn rocks that provided excellent cover while maintaining line of sight to the target area. By dawn, we were in position, the Italian encampment clearly visible, approximately 900 yards away. Through my scope, I counted 4 large tents, several vehicles, and approximately 30 personnel, mainly officers and headquarters staff rather than combat troops. Perfect targets. Command tent is the largest one, eastern edge, Bennett whispered after studying the camp through his spotting scope. Senior officers should emerge for morning briefing within the hour if they maintain standard procedures. I adjusted my position marginally, ensuring maximum comfort for what could be a long wait. The desert sun climbed higher, baking the sand around us. Despite the heat, I remained perfectly still. Movement would be a death sentence now. At 0930, activity increased around the command tent. Officers gathered, maps were brought out, and a heated discussion seemed to be taking place. Through my scope, I identified what appeared to be a colonel and 2 majors, distinguishable by their insignia. Colonel first, I murmured. Then the majors, from left to right. Bennett tracked the targets through his scope. Range 876 yards. Wind negligible. I was about to take the shot when intuition, that unexplainable 6th sense that experienced snipers develop, made me hesitate. something felt wrong. The air had changed, carrying a faint scent I couldn't immediately identify. I scanned the periphery of the camp and noticed an unusual pattern in the dunes approximately 500 yards to our right flank. "We're not alone," I breathed, barely moving my lips. Bennett tensed beside me. "Where?" "Right flank, small ridge with the dead scrub." Something's not natural about that formation. Using only his eyes, Bennett studied the area I'd indicated. After a long moment, he exhaled softly. "Agreed. Counter-sniper team." The realization triggered a cascade of calculations. If they had spotted us, they would have fired already. If they hadn't, any shot we took would reveal our position. We were caught in a deadly game of patience. "Options?" Bennett asked, his voice betraying no emotion. "Wait," I replied. "They're watching the camp too, waiting for us to make our move. If we withdraw now, they'll spot us." Hours passed in excruciating stillness. The Italian officers completed their meeting and returned to the command tent. The opportunity had passed, but a greater danger remained. The sun climbed to its zenith, then began its westward descent. The temperature inside our hide reached unbearable levels, but we dared not move to access our water canteens. At 16:30, the colonel emerged again, this time alone. He paced the perimeter of the camp, inspecting the sentries. A perfect target, but I remained frozen, aware of the watching eyes. "They know we're here," Bennett whispered after the colonel returned to his tent. "They're waiting for us to reveal ourselves." "Then we change the game," I replied, forming a desperate plan. "On my signal, fire 2 shots at the ridge where they're hiding, then be ready to move immediately." Bennett's eyebrows raised fractionally, the equivalent of shocked protest in our silent language. "That's suicide. They expect us to either shoot at the camp or withdraw. They don't expect us to engage them directly. The gamble was enormous, but remaining in place would only end one way as darkness fell and they moved to outflank us." I counted down silently, then nodded. Bennett fired twice in rapid succession at the suspicious ridge. Immediately, I shifted, my aim away from the camp, scanning the area where I believed the enemy sniper team was positioned. The disturbance of Bennett's shots had the desired effect. Movement, just a flash, as the counter-sniper team adjusted position. The glint of a scope caught the setting sun. I fired once, the rifle's report cracking across the desert. Through my scope, I saw a body jerk, then go still. "Move now," I hissed. We slithered backward from our position, using every scrap of cover. Once below the ridgeline, we abandoned all attempts at concealment for speed, running in a crouched position toward a pre-selected emergency extraction point 2 miles east. Halfway there, a shot kicked up sand 3 feet to my left. They were pursuing. We separated, using a leapfrog pattern, one moving while the other provided covering fire. The desert darkened as the sun set, providing much-needed concealment. By the time we reached the extraction point, full darkness had fallen. Wilkins was waiting with the patrol jeep, engine silent. Without a word, we climbed aboard, and he drove us away from the engagement area, keeping the lights off and navigating by starlight. Back at base, McQueen received our report with unusual gravity. "We've been compromised. Pack up. We're relocating." Tonight. The remainder of the operation took on a darker tone. We became more cautious, more lethal. Each day brought new cat-and-mouse games with the enemy counter-sniper teams. Some of our men didn't return from missions. By the 3rd week, our original 8 had been reduced to 5, yet we continued our deadly work. Intelligence gathered during our operation contributed significantly to Montgomery's victory at El Alamein months later. Few would ever know the role played by the shadows in the sand, the ghost-like figures who stalked the desert with telescopic sights and infinite patience. As for me, I never discovered the identity of the Italian sniper I killed that day. Sometimes I wonder if he had a gamekeeper's background too, if he understood the land and its secrets as I did. In another life, we might have discussed the art of stillness over drinks instead of practicing it while looking down the barrel of a rifle. War creates strange intimacies. No one knows you better than the enemy who hunts you.
Staff Sergeant James Harmon, 24. 2nd Ranger Battalion, D Company. Born in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The wall beside me disintegrates in a spray of ancient mortar and brick. I don't flinch anymore. 4 days in this hellhole they call Aachen has burned, flinching out of my system. Through the new gap in the wall, I see Kowalski's body where it's been since yesterday, sprawled awkwardly across the cobblestones. The German sniper that took him waits patiently for another target. I've seen 3 men die trying to retrieve him. They're coming again, Murphy whispers, his voice surprisingly steady for a kid who was selling insurance in Milwaukee 3 months ago. The distinctive sound of hobnailed boots on stone grows louder, not the cautious movement of infantry probing our position, but the confident stride of men with armor supporting them. The hollow metal clank of a panzer follows, confirming my fears. 5 rounds left, I say, checking my M1. Make them count. Murphy nods, eyes focused down the street where shadows dance in the firelight of burning buildings. This isn't the war they promised us. Not the open cliffs of Point du Hoc. This is a different monster altogether. House to house, room to room, fighting for every blood-soaked inch of the first German city to face American invasion. We'd landed in Normandy 4 months earlier, though it feels like years. Our mission at Point du Hoc had been relatively straightforward on paper. Scale the 100-foot cliffs and neutralize the German artillery batteries that could devastate the landing beaches. The reality had been a bloodbath, but a bloodbath with purpose and clarity. Aachen was different. The ancient imperial city with its narrow medieval streets and thick-walled buildings had transformed into a fortress. Our battalion had been detached to support the 1st Infantry Division's push into the city. We were supposed to be ready for this. We weren't. Everyone remembers D-Day, Lieutenant Parker had said during our briefing. Nobody's going to remember Aachen, but this is where we break the Siegfried Line. This is where we enter Germany proper. 3 days later, Lieutenant Parker took a piece of shrapnel through his throat while we cleared an apartment building near the city center. My squad had been reduced to 7 men. We'd been tasked with holding a critical intersection that controlled access to the Cathedral District. The ornate medieval buildings provided perfect cover for snipers, and the Germans had plenty of those. Wehrmacht, SS, Volkssturm. At this point, it didn't matter who was shooting at us. They all wore the same uniform, spoke the same language. Movement 2 o'clock, Murphy says, breaking my thoughts. Behind that bombed-out bakery, I peer through the shattered window. The street is a graveyard of rubble, abandoned vehicles, and bodies in various states of decay. The stench is something I've grown accustomed to, like the constant ringing in my ears from artillery. The radio crackles. It's Captain Reynolds, our company commander, now operating from a makeshift CP 3 blocks back. Harmon, sitrep. I keep my eyes on the street as I respond. Still holding position, sir. German armor approaching from the northeast. Sounds like a Panzer IV. Infantry support unknown number. Regiments sending reinforcements. 88mm AT gun team moving up to your position. Hold for 2 hours. 2 hours. Might as well be 2 years. Copy that, sir. We'll hold. I set the radio down, knowing better than to share the timeline with my men. Murphy looks at me, awaiting orders. Despite being 22, he has the face of a teenager, now aged by grime and exhaustion. Listen up, I say to the small group gathered in the ruins of what was once someone's living room. Germans are making another push. They've got armor. We stay quiet, let them pass the first checkpoint, then hit them from behind. Focus on the infantry first. Specialist Davis, our bar gunner, checks his weapon. Last belt, Sarge. I nod. Ammunition has been scarce since our supply lines got stretched thin. Make every round count. Once the AT team arrives, we'll have a fighting chance against the armor. Private Jennings, our radio man, looks up from his set. Message from Lieutenant Coleman. 2nd Platoon is pinned down 3 blocks east. They won't make it here anytime soon. The news settles like concrete in my gut. We're on our own. Change of plans, I say, my mind racing through limited options. Davis, take Martinez and set up in the building across the street. Jennings, Murphy, you're with me. We'll stay here. Gonzalez and Fisher, move to the church tower. You see, that Panzer stop, you drop a grenade in the hatch. The men nod, faces grim but determined. They move silently, having learned that noise attracts artillery like flies to a carcass. As darkness falls, the city transforms into a nightmare landscape of flickering fires and deep shadows. The distant rumble of artillery provides a constant backdrop, punctuated by sporadic small arms fire. Somewhere to the south, a machine gun chatters briefly, then falls silent. Murphy settles beside me at the window, rifle ready. You think they'll send more than 1 tank? If they're smart, they will, I reply. But ammunition's tight on both sides. They might be saving their armor for bigger objectives. He nods, surprisingly calm for someone awaiting a German assault. My grandfather fought in Belleau Wood. Said it was hell on earth. Wonder what he'd make of this. Probably say we're crazy for volunteering, I mutter, thinking back to the ranger training that had seemed so grueling at Camp Forest. Now it feels like a vacation compared to this urban meat grinder. The sound of the approaching Panzer grows louder. Its engine has the distinctive growl of a Maybach HL-120, powering what I'm now certain is a Panzer IV. The tank crawls into view, its silhouette stark against the burning buildings behind it. Infantry moves in its shadow, at least. A squad, maybe more. Hold, I whisper, though no one needs the reminder. We've done this dance before. The tank pauses at the intersection, its turret swiveling slowly, scanning for threats. The 75mm gun looks massive from this angle, capable of turning our position into a memory with a single shell. The commander's hatch is open, a figure visible in the moonlight. Standard procedure would be to wait until they pass, then engage from behind. But if they decide to garrison this intersection, we're finished. My decision is made for me when a shot rings out from somewhere above. One of our men in the church tower has fired early. The Germans react instantly, infantry scattering for cover while the tank commander drops into the turret, hatch slamming shut. Davis, hit them now, I shout into the radio. The bar opens up from across the street, cutting down 2 German soldiers before they can react. I aim carefully at a figure diving behind a destroyed car and squeeze the trigger. The rifle kicks against my shoulder, and the German collapses. Murphy fires methodically beside me, each shot deliberate. Jennings has abandoned his radio and joins the fight with his M1 carbine, the lighter weapon chattering as he engages targets moving along the buildings. The initial ambush works, 4 Germans down in seconds, but the survivors recover quickly. Return fire smashes into our position, forcing us to duck as chunks of masonry rain down. The Panzer's main gun elevates, searching for Davis's position. Davis, move! I yell into the radio, but it's too late. The tank fires, the thunderous blast momentarily drowning out all other sounds. The building across the street partially collapses in a cloud of dust and debris. No more fire comes from Davis's position. Time compresses in combat. Seconds feel like hours. Minutes pass in heartbeats. We exchange fire with the German infantry, who use the tank as cover. They're trying to flank us, moving through buildings to our right. Jennings, watch the back stairwell, I order, knowing the Germans will attempt to clear the building room by room. Murphy takes a hit, crying out as a bullet tears through his left arm. He grits his teeth, pressing himself against the wall. You okay? I ask, keeping my eyes on the street. I'll live, he grunts, using his teeth to tear open a field dressing. Just a through and through. The Panzer advances slowly, its machine gun spraying our position, forcing us to stay low. It's now or never for our men in the church tower, as why. If reading my thoughts, I see movement on the rooftop above the tank. A small object drops, bouncing once on the tank's turret before falling through the commander's hatch, which had opened briefly for better visibility. The explosion is muffled, contained within the steel coffin of the tank. Black smoke begins, pouring from the hatches. One crewman emerges engulfed in flames before dropping to the street. The tank grinds to a halt, now a smoldering obstacle in the middle of the intersection. The remaining German infantry pull back, disappearing into the labyrinth of ruined buildings. The sudden silence feels unnatural after the chaos. Check on Davis and Martinez, I tell Jennings, who nods and moves cautiously toward the stairs. I help Murphy finish bandaging his arm. Can you still shoot? Won't be winning any marksmanship medals, he says with a grimace. But I can pull a trigger. I spot Gonzalez and Fisher making their way back from the church, using the destroyed tank as cover. They're moving quickly, which means they know what's coming. German counterattack? I ask as they reach our position. Gonzalez nods, breathing hard. Saw them assembling 2 blocks north, at least a company with more armor. Fisher adds, they look pissed about the tank. I check my watch. We've held for 30 minutes. 90 more to go before reinforcements arrive. Jennings returns, his expression telling me everything before he speaks. Davis and Martinez are gone. Building took a direct hit. I nod, allowing myself a moment of silence for the men. They were good soldiers. Davis had a wife back in Oregon. Martinez had enlisted right after Pearl Harbor, one of our few combat veterans before. Normandy, we need to move, I say finally. This position is compromised. We'll fall back to the cathedral. Better vantage points, more exits if we get surrounded. As we gather our limited supplies, I think about how different this is from what we trained for. Rangers were supposed to be offensive shock troops, not defensive urban fighters. But war has a way of rewriting your purpose. The journey to the cathedral is a harrowing obstacle course through shattered streets and buildings. We move in pairs, leapfrogging from cover to cover, always watching for snipers. The massive twin-spired cathedral looms ahead, surprisingly intact despite the destruction surrounding it. Inside, the vast space echoes with our footsteps. Moonlight filters through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor. It would be beautiful if it weren't for the circumstances. Set up near the altar, I instruct. Murphy, you and Fisher take the north transept. Gonzalez, the south. Jennings, get on that radio and let command know our new position. We establish fields of fire covering all entrances. The thick stone walls should provide better protection than the buildings we've been fighting from. All we have to do is hold until reinforcements arrive. Hours pass in tense vigilance. Occasionally we hear movement outside, German patrols searching for us. Twice, small groups enter the cathedral, and we engage them in brief, violent encounters that leave the sacred space further desecrated with blood and bullet holes. As dawn approaches, Jennings receives word that our reinforcements are 30 minutes out. We've almost made it. That's when we hear it. The unmistakable sound of multiple tracked vehicles approaching from different directions. The Germans have surrounded the cathedral. They're going to level this place, Murphy says, voicing what we're all thinking. I look around at my remaining men, exhausted, low on ammunition but still ready to fight. This is what being a ranger means. Standing your ground when everything says to run. Jennings, tell command we need immediate artillery support on our position. He stares at me. Sir, you heard me. Danger close. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as possible. Outside, German officers shout orders. Infantry begins to establish positions around the cathedral. We're outnumbered at least 10 to 1. I check my weapon one last time. 5 rounds left. I'll make them count. It's been an honor, I tell my men, and I mean it. The first Germans breach the main entrance just as the radio crackles with unexpected news. Sergeant Harmon, this is Captain Reynolds. P-47's inbound. 2 minutes. Get your heads down. A smile crosses my face. The first in days. Sometimes life gives you one more card to play. Take cover, I yell to my men. Friendly air incoming. As we hunker behind the altar, the distinctive roar of aircraft engines grows louder. The Germans outside hear it too, their movements becoming frantic. The first bombs hit with earth-shattering force, close enough to crack some of the stained glass windows. The cathedral shudders but holds firm, built to withstand the centuries. The bombing continues for what feels like an eternity, but is probably less than a minute. When it stops, the silence is punctuated only by distant screams and the crackle of fires. We emerge cautiously. Through the cathedral doors, I see devastation. The German forces caught in the open, their vehicles burning. American Sherman tanks appear through the smoke, infantry moving alongside them. Aachen would fall 3 days later, the first German city captured by American forces. Our battalion would move on to other battles, other cities. Many wouldn't make it to see the end of the war. But in that moment, watching reinforcements secure the area around the cathedral, I allow myself to feel something close to hope. Not that the war would end soon, I knew better than that, but that perhaps there was still some purpose to the madness, some reason to continue fighting through the ruins of civilization. This wasn't the heroic war they'd sold us in training. This was grim, brutal work, clearing a continent of fascism one shattered city at a time. But someone had to do it, and Rangers always lead the way.
Oberleutnant zur See Werner Hoffmann, 29 years old, U-82, 7th U-Boat Flotilla, born in Kiel, Germany. The depth charges exploded in rapid succession, each detonation closer than the last. Inside U-82, the hull groaned under immense pressure. Pipes ruptured, spraying scalding steam across the control room. The lights flickered, plunging us momentarily into darkness before the emergency systems engaged. I clung to the periscope column, my knuckles white with tension. 37 men held their breath in unison, not daring to move, not daring to speak. "Damage report," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the creaking metal. Chief Engineer Müller wiped blood from a gash on his forehead. "Forward torpedo room flooding, depth gauge damaged, diesel engines inoperative." He paused, listening, to the hull. "But the electric motors still function, Herr Kalu." Another depth charge exploded. This one so close the pressure waves slammed us against bulkheads and equipment. Somewhere aft, a man screamed. 50 meters and holding, called the diving officer, his voice strained. "The British destroyer is still above us." I closed my eyes, feeling the cold sweat trickle down my back. We had been underwater for 16 hours already. The air was growing thick with carbon dioxide, and the batteries were nearly depleted. The men looked to me, their faces pale, eyes sunken from exhaustion. Fear was a luxury none of us could afford. "Silence," I ordered. "Absolute silence." We dived to 70 meters. "The hull is rated for only 60, Herr Kalu." I met his gaze steadily. 70 meters. May God have mercy on us all. 3 weeks earlier, we had departed from the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire on France's Atlantic coast. U-82 was a Type 7C U-boat, the backbone of the Kriegsmarine's submarine fleet. At 67 meters in length, she carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 44 men. We were part of Wolfpack Seawolf, tasked with intercepting Allied convoy traffic in the North Atlantic. Our mission briefing had been straightforward. Locate convoy SC-67 bound from Halifax to Liverpool. Report its position to U-boat. Command, then coordinate with other submarines to attack simultaneously. Admiral Dunitz's Wolfpack tactics had proven devastatingly effective during what we called the happy time. The early war years when Allied anti-submarine warfare was still in its infancy. But by February 1942, things had changed. The British had improved their convoy system, escort vessels now carried improved ASDIC sonar detection, and aircraft patrols extended farther into the Atlantic. What had once been a hunter's paradise had become a deadly game of hide-and-seek. The first 8 days of our patrol passed without incident. We traveled on the surface whenever possible, using our diesel engines to recharge batteries and make good speed. Submerged, the electric motors provided only limited range and speed. The crew settled into the familiar rhythm of watch rotations, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. The off hours were spent in cramped bunks, often shared with another sailor, on opposite rotation. Life aboard U-82 was a constant battle against the elements. Condensation dripped from every surface, soaking our clothes and bedding. Mold grew rampantly. The stench of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the primitive toilet, a single facility for the entire crew, created an atmosphere that would have been unbearable to anyone not accustomed to submarine service. Our radio man, Funkmat Krause, intercepted a transmission on the 10th day. British merchant traffic reporting weather conditions, transmitted in a code our cryptographers had long since broken. I ordered a course change to intercept. Plot a course northeast, I told the navigator. We'll position ourselves ahead of their projected path and wait. 20 hours later, lookouts spotted smoke on the horizon. Through the attack periscope, I counted 17 merchant vessels arranged in 3 columns. The convoy was escorted by a British destroyer, 2 corvettes, and what appeared to be an armed trawler. I dictated a coded message to Krause, who transmitted our findings to U-boat headquarters. Message sent, Herr Kalo, Krause confirmed. U-boat command acknowledges. 5 additional boats are converging on our position. I nodded, studying the convoy's formation through the periscope. We'll wait for nightfall. Surface and approach from the port flank, where the escort coverage appears weakest. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. At 2200 hours, we surfaced into the darkness of the North Atlantic night. The sea was moderate, with waves of 2 to 3 meters that helped mask our conning tower. The convoy was visible by its silhouettes against the slightly lighter horizon. All ahead 1/3, I ordered. Helmsman, bring us around to course 315. We maneuvered carefully, using the diesel engines at minimal power to reduce our wake. I stood in the bridge alongside my first watch officer, Oberleutnant Brower, and 2 lookouts. The frigid February air sliced through our waterproof clothing. Sea spray froze on the metal surfaces of the conning tower. Bridge to control room, I called down through the voice pipe. Target bearing 045, range estimated 3,000 meters. Make torpedo tubes 1 through 4 ready. Tubes. 1 through 4 ready, Herr Kalo, came the acknowledgement from the control room. We closed the distance methodically. At 1,200 meters, I could distinguish individual ships. A large tanker steamed 3rd in the center column, a perfect target. Behind it, a Liberty ship heavily laden with cargo rode low in the water. Prepare to dive, I ordered. We'll make our attack from periscope depth. The klaxon sounded. The lookouts disappeared down the hatch, followed by Brower, with me the last to leave the bridge. The familiar sequence unfolded, hatches secured, ballast tanks flooded, the boat angling downward as we slipped beneath the waves. At periscope depth, I took careful measurements, calling out bearings and ranges to the torpedo data computer operator. Tanker. Bearing 048, range 800 meters, speed 8 knots. Set depth to 4 meters. The targeting calculations were made, the torpedo tubes flooded. Solution ready, Herr Kalo. I took one final look through the periscope, confirming. The tanker was still on course. Fire torpedo 1. The submarine shuddered slightly as the first torpedo launched. 20 seconds later, I ordered, fire torpedo 2. The torpedoes ran straight and true. Through the periscope, I watched their wakes cutting through the dark water, barely visible in the moonlight. 78 seconds after firing, the first torpedo struck the tanker midships. A tremendous explosion lit up the night, sending a fireball skyward as the vessel's cargo ignited. The second torpedo hit moments later, breaking the ship's back. Confirmed, I announced. The control room erupted in muted cheers. There was no time to celebrate. Shift target to Liberty ship, bearing 052, range 900 meters. We reloaded and fired tubes 3 and 4. Both torpedoes found their mark, and the Liberty ship began listing heavily to starboard. The convoy erupted into chaos. Ships scattered, breaking formation. Signal lamps flashed between vessels. The destroyer and corvettes increased speed, beginning their hunt. Take us deep, I ordered. Silent running. U-82 descended to 40 meters. The electric motors hummed quietly as we slipped away from the attack site. But our escape would not be so simple. 20 minutes later, the hydrophone operator reported propeller noises approaching rapidly. Destroyer closing from the southwest. Screw noise indicates high speed. The ASDIC pings soon followed. The distinctive sound of active sonar searching for our position. Each ping grew louder, indicating the destroyer was homing in on us. Rig for depth charges, I ordered. All compartments prepare for attack, the tow. Men moved quickly, securing loose equipment, donning life-saving gear. I ordered the boat deeper, to 60 meters, pushing the hull to its design limits. The pressure increased noticeably, causing small leaks to spray from pipe fittings and hull seams. The first depth charges exploded at 1,000 meters distance, the concussions shaking the boat. The destroyer adjusted course, the ASDIC pings growing louder. "All stop," I commanded. "Cut all non-essential electrical systems." We drifted silently. The only sounds the quiet breathing of the crew and occasional creaks from the hull. The ASDIC pings drew closer. The destroyer was nearly overhead. The depth charges fell in a pattern, starting distant but walking closer with each barrage. The boat rocked violently with each explosion, light fixtures and instruments breaking. Free from their mounts, in the torpedo room, a seam split, causing a spray of seawater to penetrate the compartment. "Damage control to forward torpedo room," I ordered. "Prepare emergency patches." For 3 hours, the destroyer hunted us. My plan had been to remain submerged until the British vessel exhausted its depth charge supply or lost contact. But as oxygen levels depleted and carbon dioxide built up, men began showing signs of hypoxia. Headaches first, then dizziness, nausea. Some vomited at their stations. The batteries were dangerously low. Without power, we could not run the pumps to clear water from damaged compartments. We could not operate the hydrophones to track the destroyer. We would be blind, immobile, and ultimately doomed. I made my decision. Surface the boat. Prepare deck gun and anti-aircraft weapons. "Surface, Herr Kaleo?" Brower questioned, his eyes wide. "The destroyer. We die slowly here or take our chances on the surface," I interrupted. "I choose to fight." We blew the ballast tanks and rose toward the surface. As the boat breached, I rushed up the conning tower ladder and onto the bridge, followed by the gun crews. The destroyer was 800 meters away, its searchlight sweeping the water. "Man the 8.8 centimeter deck gun. Prepare." 2 centimeter flak!" I shouted against the wind. "The searchlight found us!" The destroyer turned sharply, bringing its forward guns to bear. Our deck gun fired first, the shell falling short. The destroyer returned fire, shells splashing around U-82. One struck the conning tower, killing the port lookout instantly, and wounding Brower. Our flak guns opened fire as the destroyer closed distance. Through determination or luck, several rounds struck the bridge of the British vessel, momentarily disrupting its attack. In that brief window, I ordered emergency speed on the diesels, turning the boat hard to starboard and laying a smokescreen. Under cover of smoke and darkness, we managed to increase the distance. The destroyer pursued for another hour before breaking off, likely low on fuel after its prolonged depth charge attack. Dawn found U-82 limping westward. 3 men dead, 7 injured. The forward torpedo room was flooded and sealed off. 1 diesel engine was inoperative. The radio was damaged, preventing us from reporting our successes or requesting assistance. I gathered the officers in the wardroom. "Gentlemen, we've sustained critical damage. Saint-Nazaire is 1,100 nautical miles east. We have insufficient fuel to return to France," Chief Engineer Miller spoke up. "The neutral Spanish port of Vigo is approximately 600 miles southeast. International law would require them to intern us, but the men would survive." I considered. "Our options: plot a course for Vigo. We'll stay surfaced as much as possible to conserve battery power. Maintain a constant watch for aircraft." For 6 days, we limped across the Atlantic. Twice we were forced to crash dive to avoid Allied patrol aircraft. Each dive strained our damaged hull further. Water rationing became critical. Food stores, already meager, were cut to half rations. On February 19, 1942, the Spanish coast appeared on the horizon. As we approached territorial waters, 2 Spanish naval vessels intercepted us. I ordered the classified equipment and codebooks destroyed, then surrendered the boat. As we were escorted into Vigo harbor, I stood on the bridge of U-82 for the final time. The boat that had been our home, our weapon, and nearly our tomb would be interned. For the duration of the war, my men and I would spend the remainder of the conflict as internees in a neutral country, neither free men nor prisoners of war in the traditional sense. I watched silently as Spanish officials came aboard, formally taking control of U-82. The swastika flag was lowered from the conning tower. My crew assembled on deck, their faces revealing a complex mixture of emotions: relief at having survived, disappointment at our internment, uncertainty about what lay ahead. Of the 44 men who had departed Saint-Nazaire, 38 would live to see the war's end. U-82's war was over, but the larger conflict would rage on for 3 more bloody years. The grey wolves of the U-boat fleet would continue their hunt in the Atlantic depths, though increasingly they would become the hunted rather than the hunters. As I stepped onto Spanish soil, I realized that for us, at least, the long cold war beneath the waves had finally ended.